Welcome to the Story Geek Show, part of Orange Grove 55. On today's show, we're digging deeper into season 3 of The Mandalorian, one of the shows that just about every Star Wars fan agrees is awesome. You don't meet a lot of people that don't like The Mandalorian, which is fantastic in a very polarized Star Wars world. But season 3, is it off to a good start? And what deeper insights can we pull from the show? We're talking about all that. Plus, we'll get into some of the latest rumors about what's going on at Lucasfilm. If you have any comments about what you think of The Mandalorian or want to answer any of the questions alongside us, go ahead and feel free to leave us a comment down below. In the meantime, I want to introduce our illustrious panel here. I'm going to go backwards because we have a new face on the Orange Grove 55 channel, and that is Mr. Bryant Dillon from Fanbase Press. Welcome to the show,
Hello,
Bryant.
Everyone. Thank you. Honored to be here.
Yeah, tell the folks what you're up to and kind of what your background is.
Sure. I am a co-founder of Fanbase Press, as you mentioned, with my wife, Barbara. We've been doing Fanbase Press for about just over a decade now. It's for anyone that doesn't know, it's a independent comic book publisher and a geek culture website. So we have put out over 10 plus titles at this point. We've had the honor of being nominated for an Eisner with one of our titles, Kinsey. Last year, we were very honored to get nominated for Best Comics Journalism. And so you can also find, in addition to our published works, find a lot of interviews, reviews, podcasts, things like that on the website as well.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And of all the other geek culture kind of media sites out there, I will say that I think Fanbase Press is probably the closest to what the Story Geeks intention is. We have really good conversation, really in-depth conversations about the material. So it's always a pleasure to have you on, Brian. I say hello to Barbara for us because we love having her on too. And I get a chance to podcast with them from time to time, and it's always a pleasure. So thank you for that, and welcome to the show. Yeah, it's always a good time. Dre, freshly squeezed. I don't have all your titles on hand right now.
You gotta look them up, right?
I feel like you need like an architect title as well, because Dre like knows how to do the architecture stuff. He's like, this is the acreage here in this part of Disneyland, and that all very good.
I got you, Jay. I put it in the ticker. All his titles.
Oh, there they are. Oh no, they're all there in the ticker. That's Mr. Dre for you. Tell the folks where they can find you and what you're up to with OG55.
The best place to find me is going to be at VashSky on Twitter. It's right down there. Just go ahead and look. Just go ahead and type it up, and it should pop up for all the as Christine Waysons McCarthy would say. Sorry. For all the
robust
discussion right there, you can go ahead and do that. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55 at, Freshly Squeezed. Your source for juice and news and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. So please hit that subscribe button, because I'm telling you, we've got some great shows in the works. What I'm doing there? Well, we've been talking about a lot of stuff like Avatar at Disneyland. We've been talking about all the updates coming out of both C-suite with Bob Iger and all the theme park updates and so forth like that. But it's really cool to kind of break away from that just a little bit and get into some content that I think all impacts our lives, the stories that impact our lives. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Love that jingle.
It's so good. It's so good. So, and last but certainly not least, the leader of our little OG55 channel here, which, by the way, has grown into, you guys have a fantastic fan base. You guys have really cool people that you have not only on the show, but you have following you here. Is why I wanted to join the channel. OG, tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about where to find you.
All right, you can find me right here on Orange Grove 55, where we dive into a lot of theme park stuff. That's kind of the meat and potatoes, but we also dive into the film streaming movie side of things like we are today. We're talking some Mando, Lucasfilm. We have a lot of fun here, just a lot of geeky, nerdy stuff. It's a good time. So right here, Orange Grove 55. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at Orange Grove 55. There we go. Oh, and here we go. One for good measure.
I love it. Love it. That's awesome. So the way we're going to structure this conversation is we are going to talk spoilers. By the way, spoiler warning. We're going to get into Mandalorian episode 1 and episode 2. We're going to start with episode 1, then we'll transition into episode 2. Some of the discussion might cross over a little bit, so that's just natural since we've all seen both shows. And then after that discussion is over, we're going to get into some of the latest rumors coming out of Lucasfilm. It looks like ever since Iger came back, it looks like there's going to be movement, lots of movement. And we're going to see what some of those rumors might look like and what might be happening over at Lucasfilm. So let's start with the return of one of the best Star Wars properties, in my opinion, that we've ever seen. And that is The Mandalorian. I almost said Andor by mistake just because I love Andor. But The Mandalorian is also awesome. So I'm just going to go around. We'll start with you, OG. What is your 1 to 10 rating of episode 1, 10 being the best, of season 3, episode 1, season 3? What is your 1 to 10 rating, and why would you give it that number?
Okay, so episode 1, I would give it a 7 out of 10.
All right,
pretty solid rating. I thought it did a very good job at kind of setting up the season. You know, I love that opening scene with the giant alligator and whatever. I don't even know what the official name is, but that giant alligator and that whole kind of like that baptism scene with the Mandalorians. I thought that was fantastic. I really, really liked it. It just didn't hit as hard as episode 2 for me personally. That's why I'm giving it a little bit lower, but overall still a very solid episode and a really good time. So
yeah. 7. That sounds pretty. So 7's pretty good. What about you, Dre? What's your 1 to 10?
You know, I would have given it a 7 too if it had not been for episode 2. So I got to go 6.5 probably. Look, it's a setting of the stage episode, right? So it's a very exposition heavy. It's very kind of like it's bearings, where we at, where we going kind of thing. And because this universe is so complex and it has to interact with not just one series but 2, you know, it's really important to kind of establish where we are because it has been some time since we've dived straight into the world of Mandalorian proper, right, or core. So I get it. And look, there was some cool stuff. I mean, the crocodile scene was pretty cool. The baptism, going into more of we have some questions about that as well later on, the more religious aspects with this specific cult or clan of the Mandalorians. It was cool to see Grief Karga, Navarro. That was pretty fun to kind of see that area progress. Now that it's kind of changed from or has been altered since we first saw it in season 1. So that was quite interesting. Cool to see Bo-Katan again and what that means. Obviously we know, but it did kind of suggests to me, this is going to be quite exciting, I think, of a season. However, the episode itself wasn't maybe as strong as probably it could have been. So 6.5.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And before I hit you, Brian, I just want to say what's up to Theme Park Casual. He's always in the chat. Dude is a super cool guy.
Yes.
And it's always a pleasure to see you, Theme Park. Thanks for dropping in. If you have any questions for us along the way, let us know. And if you are in the chat right now, let us know on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give this particular episode 1 of The Mandalorian? So, Brian, that's your turn. What do you think?
I'm probably biased because I really, really, really love the Mandalorian. I just can't get over it. So nice. I want to give it an 8. I'll be honest, but I think that's a little bit of the fan in me speaking. If I'm a little more analytical about it, I think a 7 is a good rating for it because. Looking back, especially when I was talking with my wife after seeing the first episode, she was a little less impressed. And she's always sort of the barometer for I'm like, all right, am I just Star Wars in on it? But what she compared it to was the 2 previous, season premieres. And I had to admit, going back, the first episode of The Mandalorian as a series was just stunning. It was amazing. You know, it instantly defined itself. We knew exactly what it was, and it left no prisoners that first episode. You know, the second one with the reveal of Boba Fett's armor. You know, the crate dragon, and on Timothy Oliphant, who is a special effect, you know, on himself, you know, just add something to the episode. And then the reveal, of course, of Fett at the end is an incredibly strong episode. So I think in comparison to that kind of thing, yeah, this is I can see why some people might feel a little disappointed, but I think some of that is the wealth of Star Wars content that we find ourselves immersed in, and especially what The Mandalorian has done in regards to our expectations. You know, it consistently delivers. The last thing that I will say is, I think for me, and episode 2 sort of solidified this, but Bo-Katan as a character, Katie Sackhoff, she's just adding, like, you know, prime fuel to this starship. You know, like we're firing on all cylinders every time she's in a scene. And even though there's just a small scene, and I you know, I'm sure there's people like my wife who will complain and go, does she sit like that in that throne just waiting for Din Djarin to show up? Does she just do that for like 7 to 12 days waiting for him? Yes, it is theatrical, but again, I think we're operating on such great chemistry for these characters, and giving us a little bit of a slow burn to the start. I mean, the season is laid out perfectly in that first episode, as someone else mentioned. But this feel of like, am I an adversary with this person? Am I an ally? Is there a mix of the two? What does it say about Mandalore as a people, as a culture, the division, and then you get into like even more meta stuff. Even though if you know, the episode doesn't go that deep, you go into stuff of like, you know, what does this say about religions in our own world? What does it say about fundamentalism? Like, you know, and is the mission that Din is on to sort of like answer for his, you know, sins, is it really? Is the discovery at the end going to be, I shouldn't even be on this mission, you know?
Yeah.
Which could be an interesting place to end up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we have a question about that, so we're going to be talking about that in detail, because I felt that this season seems like the most religious journey,
Sure,
like pulling those things into it that I think we've seen yet. I'm probably the most negative about episode 1 of the 4 of us. However, I'm not. It's a 6.5 out of 10. So I'm not saying it's bad at all. I think it's good. But the entire episode was set up. It does feel very much like comic book pacing, which is to say that it's like this thing and now this thing and now this thing. And I think that part of what adds to that feel is the fact that we're using the volume, and so it's like, now this scene is the scene that's set up in the volume, and now this scene is and you're not like necessarily going to play. Although I will say that I think the Mandalorian uses the volume as good as anybody has ever used the volume, which is crazy because they are kind of the originators of it. So I think that part of it was really cool. But some of it felt like some rehashing, right? Like season 2, they fought a sandworm. Now they're almost the exact same setting, but it's a alligator creature. I think the ceremony with the Mandalorian kid is, again, I think to me, it felt a little unnecessary. Like the whole setup was just to give this kid a helmet. But I do think that it was leaning into the religious conversation we're going to have. I think it was purposely doing so. So it felt a little bit set up-y to me. The last complaint I have is that there are times when I'm watching the live action stuff where I feel like Dave Filoni, his influence on the live action stuff is like palpable. And what I mean by that is that like it feels like sometimes I'm watching the Clone Wars, like, and that usually makes me feel uncomfortable because I'm concerned that it's going to go too far down like a kid route. Not that the Mandalorian kids can't appreciate it. Like I would have loved this show as a kid. It would have been my favorite show of all time. It's still one of my favorite shows of all time. But there's sometimes when you see the pirates show up and you're just kind of like, oh, please don't make these Gungans. Please don't do that to me. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't think he has, but I do think that both this episode and the next episode did have a lot of really fun callbacks to the prequel trilogy, which I did enjoy. And then just on the positive side, I love seeing Mando and Grogu together. I mean, when he's sitting with him in the cockpit and he's like, oh, I grew up over there on that planet. And I don't know, remember that was in episode 1 or episode 2, but their relationship is just the way that all of the different actors involved, from the stunt people to Pedro Pascal to whoever's operating the puppet, all of that is done at the highest level of Star Wars practical effects that it can be done. And I think that that's pretty awesome. So I think it was good setup, but it didn't give us any one scene. Like the first scene of the first episode of The Mandalorian is like, that's the way you start a season, right? Like this was more like, okay, like I got some exposition about where characters are, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it just felt like we were playing a little catch up, and I'm a little bit more like Dre, like it's not as high for me. But I do love this show. So you're going to see me, like you guys, our ratings are going to go up when we get to the next one.
I actually have a question for you guys.
Sure.
About this. And you kind of touched upon it with the, what's that tech called? The volume.
Yeah.
And the CGI in this first episode, which I thought was really good with that giant alligator and what have you.
Yeah.
There is a discrepancy between some of these Star Wars shows. You take a show like Mando, which has airtight effects. It looks like basically like movie quality stuff, right? You can put this on the big screen and it looks fantastic. And then you have shows like Boba Fett, which there's sections and parts of that show that look kind of janky, right? Like what's going on here? Because it all comes from the same studio. It's all coming from Industrial Light and Magic. It's like, why the discrepancy in the quality? Is it just because maybe the studio values Mando more as a property, so they actually care more? Or is it because of some other reasons? Is it because Filoni and Favreau were more hands-on with Mando? What do you guys think about that? Because there is a gap for sure.
I mean, this would be speculation from me, okay? But my speculation is that I think that Filoni and Favreau, and probably some of the season 1 folks that directed episodes, they got a chance to kind of play around in the volume a little bit more. But every time you hand the volume off to a new director, they didn't get to play around with it as much. They've got a tight time frame. We got to get this thing filmed. And so I have a feeling that part of it is how familiar are you? Because if you look at it, like a lot of the people who use the volume well have been involved with The Mandalorian from the beginning and are directing other episodes, or they had more time on their production and or had a bajillion amount of time to create their arc comparative to Kenobi. And Kenobi looks like it when you see it. It's like this, they're not using the volume that well. Their sets aren't that complete. It's just, there's a little bit of a, not to say that Kenobi's terrible, but they don't seem like they have the experience with a brand new tool in their toolkit. And I think that's what it feels like to me a little bit more. But what do you guys think? How would you guys label it?
Brian, you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure. I would agree with you, Jay. I do think, especially because we've just had I think it was in the Hollywood Reporter, an expose with Filoni, leading up to season 3's premiere. And he mentioned about how, I mean, listen, the guy's been hand selected by, George Lucas, and then like sort of treated, in a very privileged way in the Star Wars universe. Not that he hasn't earned it in many ways, but I don't think everyone is getting to go hang out on Rogue One and The Last Jedi and train under those directors and things like that. And I think you're seeing a quality that was there with Favreau and Filoni at the beginning. As Jay noted, there was a select group, the best of the best, brought in to direct those episodes. And I think obviously this is treated like a crown jewel, sort of in the Disney Star Wars hat. But I also would argue, and I think that sometimes I think it's interesting, Jay, because things that you or others attribute to Filoni, I sometimes go, I don't know if that was Filoni or Favreau. Because
you might be right.
and there's times that I trust Filoni a little bit more, but again, I can't say I'm speculating as well. But my instinct with Boba Fett is that Favreau had earned enough credit, in the Lucasfilm sort of team that he was able to do what he wanted to, and I think he just did whatever he wanted to on Book of Boba Fett, and it didn't quite work. I don't know if that covers for poor special effects, but it could if you're shooting. I guess if you're shooting it certain ways, if you're like, hey, we're putting a baby Rancor in the sun, full frame for 20 minutes, that might be more difficult than making Mandalorian look cool for, a 5-minute scene where he's fighting a creature, of the same size. So that's just my instinct, is that that Boba Fett, the leash was off a little bit, and Mandalorian, there's probably not only Filoni and Favreau balancing each other out, but I'm sure there's a lot of other eyes on the content,
Yeah, I mean, that's lots of other eyes for sure. And I think there seemed to be some, well, let's say Mandalorian was given the white glove treatment, right? It can basically do whatever it wants to earn its stripes. Yeah. Whereas Book of Boba Fett was a little bit of a risk. So that could also contribute to the lack of rendering power for some of those effects, right? Well, but we also heard that production had changed focus quite a bit. And it was, from what I understand, it was originally going to be an actual movie, then it was stretched out to an actual series, and then, Rangers of the New Republic doesn't happen because reasons. And we have a question about that later, by the way. Right. And so, it had to change and morph, and also to set up some stuff for, the Mandalorian season 3 and so forth. And it happens to these kind of interconnected worlds a lot, right? We see that sometimes with Marvel. We saw that a lot with DC. When things change and they're outside of your control, but you still have to kind of be on this time crunch and get things out in a certain point, because it doesn't make sense if you don't. Some things drop off by the wayside. And sometimes that's story, sometimes that's effects and so forth. And those kind of things, I think, hurt Book of Boba Fett just a little bit. But I think you look at Mandalorian, and from what I understand, they were given, on average, about $15 million an episode, from what I understand.
Wow.
They were given a little bit more resources, given a little bit more time, and you're seeing that pay off. Some people were kind of critical about the costumes in the first act of the first episode, right, where the baptism scene actually takes place. I get it, and some people were critical of that scene and so forth, but I think it's really important to kind of set that stage, even though it's it's a little bit like, why are we here, why are we doing this? When the helmet actually comes on, we hear the from the helmet actually come on. That's really crucial for episode 2, right? And then the living waters scene, as we'll get to, I'm sure, when we go over episode 2. So, you gotta set these things in motion, and sometimes not all of the work is going to be as strong. Ironically, the best episodes in Book of Boba Fett were Mandalorian season 2.5 episodes, so that's kind of funny.
Absolutely.
Did you have any thoughts about it? Yeah. Yeah. Did you have any thoughts about it, OG?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you guys touched upon a lot of great points. I think there is a white glove treatment when it comes to Mando. Mando is really becoming their premier property at Lucasfilm now. It's really is the most popular thing they've done. I mean, those characters are way more popular, in my opinion, than the sequel trilogy characters and what have you. Grogu's a phenomenon. Yeah. So I think there is a little bit of that white glove treatment where they're like, okay, we got to be careful with this one, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of that is happening here with that, which is good. I mean, look, it is an important franchise. Mando's hugely important for Lucasfilm right now. So it's good that they're doing that. I am a little disappointed, though, because Boba Fett's also a very important character. It's a legacy character, and it would have been nice to see maybe a little bit more love put into that one. I mean, there was some fantastic stuff in there, no doubt, but some of it didn't really land that great, and it did look a little cheap in some parts. And I don't know. I'm really particular when it comes to Star Wars. Franchise means a lot to me, and I just want to see these things perfect. I don't want to have those gaps. I don't want to be watching a Star Wars show and thinking like, wow, that was a little CW.
Yeah. True. I think that Boba Fett suffered from something that is very odd, and I have a feeling it's time related and story change related, like you said, Dre. But like, if you when we saw Boba Fett show up in The Mandalorian, that was a brutal episode. That dude was intense, right? Like, and we all went, "That's the Boba Fett that I've always wanted to see." Now, on paper, you bring in Robert Rodriguez to direct a lot of this, if not all. I don't remember how much of Boba Fett he did, but he did a bunch of it.
He did a little bit of it, yeah.
And so you're
and
thinking
he directed
to
the
yourself,
Mandalorian episode with him too, the one that you're mentioning.
yeah. So you're
natural
thinking to
choice,
yourself,
yeah.
like, yeah, come on, like this guy has a legacy of like
Right.
brutality in his movies, right? So on paper it was all there. It's just that the components didn't all kind of fit when it actually got put out there. So that always speaks to me to having a lack of time, because like every complaint I have about not every complaint, most of my complaints about Kenobi come down to they just didn't have time, man. They just said we need a tent pole, we need another tent pole. We got the Mandalorian, we got Boba Fett, but Boba Fett, like, people are not as excited about it as we hoped. Quick, get Kenobi out there. And so I kind of feel for the creatives behind it, because like I feel like we only see what hits the screen, but what goes into that stuff and what you're told to do differently by the powers that be, that can get pretty dicey. So anyway,
well, I, just to add on to that real quick, I think you're right, Jay, and I think it's disappointing, I think, for original trilogy fans to be like, all right, so that's where Boba Fett ended up. Like, we waited for
right.
we waited for years. He was amazing on The Mandalorian. And honestly, I know you mentioned him. He does show up, and he's sort of like the badass that we want. But what was also really cool about on The Mandalorian is he shows up, and he's a different dude. He's a changed guy, and you're like, wow, what an interesting place. So like, everyone's worried about them taking the teeth out of Boba Fett, but to have him have sort of this spiritual resurrection is really interesting. And then it's like, it didn't come together it feels so complete in his presence in The Mandalorian, but then when in his own series, it again, I feel like it reminds me of like a friend getting distracted by something. Like, you know, I love you, Favreau, but you just couldn't resist bringing Mando back in there. And be like, what's going on with Grogu? And I do hope maybe there's like a reason this will make sense later if the events of Book of Boba Fett become important to what we see in Mando season 3. It'll make more sense. But right now, it does feel like they just let him play with some toys, and he did have a lot of fun, but it didn't really serve the characters the way that Mandalorian definitely, there's care to it serving each of these characters in this series.
Yeah. You can, Jay Pike brings up an interesting point, neuter Boba Fett. Look, they broke him down to build him back up. And you got to have that payoff, and there just wasn't enough there, and that's why a lot of people were like, "Ooh," they were unsatisfied, let's say, of his depiction in Boba Fett, which was unfortunate because you knew where they wanted to go, just couldn't quite get there. And Rodriguez, I mean, it's some people can play in the sandbox, other people maybe not so effectively.
Yeah,
sometimes it happens.
Yeah, and I feel like if we would have seen the Robert Rodriguez directed Boba Fett that we saw in The Mandalorian, then we would have had something that everyone would have said like, "That's cool, man."
Yeah.
But we just didn't get that, so it's just weird. All right, so let's transition into this. We're gonna take a hard left turn because we've all mentioned this to a certain degree, but this was really interesting to me. So The Mandalorian continues to use a lot of metaphors that technically relate to the early Christian church, which I'm very familiar with. So it is weird for me to see it in a Star Wars show, but I find it fascinating. Many in the early church called themselves the Way, and so of course we've heard this is the way, like Mark said multiple times. Din believes he's in need of redemption, and then he needs to bathe in the living waters. You guys already mentioned that there was like basically a baptism to turn that kid into a Mandalorian. The name of episode 1 of season 3 is The Apostate, which is primarily a religious term. So there are obvious ways in which the Mandalorian, of course, and Mandalorian lore is in stark opposition to the early Christian church, because the Mandalorians are very much of a warrior people, whereas the early Christian church had nothing to do with fighting, really. But why do you think I'll start with you, Dre. Why do you think the storytellers are using these correlations?
Well, I mean, there's an obvious kind of. I think there's an obvious a way to go when it comes to Star Wars and utilizing religious themes and so forth, right? We saw that a lot with the original Star Wars and continued on from there. The kind of Joseph Campbell mindset, the stories. The I don't want to put any religion down, but the religious stories that are told, they sometimes they're inspired directly from another. Other times they hit the same thematic elements, themes and so forth. These kind of stories that cross culture, cross time, cross language and so forth. It's what binds us all together. That was definitely an inherent trait to the original Star Wars kind of mythos when it was constructed, right? And George Lucas has kind of pontificated about that quite a bit. When it comes to like the Mandalorians, really they were, obviously, you see kind of the iconography first with Empire Strikes Back, but then they became kind of almost like the anti-Jedi, if that makes sense, the foil, let's say. And so they would have their own kind of religious values. And it's interesting, if you look into kind of Mandalorian culture and so forth and the lore and the history of it, it's kind of like Vikings meets, in this case, what is it? The kind of Spanish conquistadors almost, right?
Yeah.
Which would be very religious in nature. But also they would be, on the path of conquest, and for thousands of years before, at least in the old timeline and in the expanded universe, that's obviously changed now. But in the, in Legends, right? They like conquered large swaths of the galaxy, got into fights with Jedi, all that kind of stuff, and it would make sense if. And Clone Wars kind of talks about that a little bit, so I think it's a little bit still canon that this clan being so, almost religious and how it appeals to the old Mandalorian customs and so forth, the way would want to preserve that tradition. And I think they're making a statement about that a little bit later, especially with the living waters and so forth. That's a very Judeo-Christian kind of thing where, you redeem yourselves in a body of water that is moving, that is like a river or so forth, and you drain your sins and all of that. And I think that the bigger point that they're making, I think, is, and especially, in episode 2, right? Bo-Katan and Din Djarin go back and forth, and Bo-Katan's like, hey, look, listen, those are kid stories. They mean nothing. There's nothing significant about the living waters underneath Mandalore. And you have Din Djarin is like, hey, well, listen, our traditions this is all we have. Our clans and our people are scattered like stars into the wind, right? What binds us together as a people? What is our traditions, and it is our customs, and it is our values? That is very consistent with Star Wars, as was envisioned in 1977. And it's also kind of commentary on today, right? Like, we live in a kind of almost nihilistic postmodern culture, right? And we're throwing out traditions and we're doing all this. And I think the filmmakers are trying to say traditions matter. They bring people together. Like your fan of the fandom of Star Wars can bring people together, even though you might be different in, gender, race, religion, or creed, that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of what they're saying there, using the kind of Mandalorian, what is it? Scan or wrapping in order to deliver that to you. And I think it's very effective.
Interesting.
Wow. Deeply insightful. Thank you for that. Brian, what do you think? What's the reason for this level of correlation between the two things?
I am not sure what the specific intent of the correlation is, if it's simply uncovered ground, stuff that has not been tackled yet, but because what strikes me as interesting is where it's the same as some of the things that we have seen before in that it follows some of the Star Wars structure of examining institutions and fundamentalism and how that can be both offer positive things, but also have a lot of negative repercussions. Obviously comparing it to the way that Lucas eventually revealed the Jedi, or at least the Jedi of the prequel era, to be, he clearly did not, have the same, when he was thinking about these things, he did not have the same hero worship of the Jedi that a lot of us came to, I think, after the original trilogy. And I think that is clearly set up, when you take on the Mandalorian at the beginning, season 1, as creators, you have to go, well, we're dealing with the shadow of Boba Fett. And what do we do with that? And so I think they did a lot of amazing things in those first seasons of making this character different and making him have still the same interest and intrigue and sort of oomph that Fett had in his heyday. But I think part of it now is looking at hero worship of the Mandalorians and how do we get away from, we've told this story about warring factions. How do we get to a place where there is, as was just being said, there is some sort of unification or connection? And even what does that mean? I mean, one of the very interesting things that I think fans are not always, they don't discuss it as much as I think would be worth discussing, is that the progression of the Jedi that we see has them continually evolving. We see the Jedi from the prequel series. We see what Luke becomes, which is this weird bastardized version. And then we see a new version emerging. And the message seems to be eventually that you have to continue to change. You have to continue to adapt. You can't get locked in the past, and I think the same thing is being done with the Mandalorians from a strategic storytelling perspective. How do we push the Mandalorians forward, and what will Mandalorians be after this period? Because we know what they are to a certain degree in the past, but what is the new form of Mandalorian going to be? And what will we take from each side? There's going to be many sides, but right now we're consistently going back and forth between, the Watch with Din Djarin and sort of Bo-Katan's more, I guess, more majorly accepted Mandalorian view. So I think that the last thing I'll say is I think it's really cool that people are connecting in this way to Star Wars, because I think that's always what Star Wars has offered. It's also very interesting that we have these Christian, this Christian symbolism happening now, when initially with the structure of never removing the helmet and some of that, I saw this relating more to religions where culturally the face coverings were something that were consistently present. So once again, I think Star Wars is offering, a fantasy that we can tap in from many different places, many different cultures. And that's what Lucas wanted, with his initial efforts. So. Yeah,
that's great. Fantastic stuff. OG, what do you think? I'll back clean up on this one. What do you think?
Okay, this is interesting. Star Wars, and Michael Ebba here, I think he puts it nicely. He says, I think it's the cool thing about Star Wars. It's always had correlations to things in real life that we as a society across all life can relate to in one way or another. And he's absolutely right about that. Star Wars, it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing a lot of this religious symbolism in The Mandalorian. This is something that, is very, very consistent with Star Wars. You see this throughout the franchise, and not just religion, not just spiritual, but you see it with like cultures and stuff like that. I mean, if you look at, like, say, for instance, Queen Amidala, she's very much inspired by a Japanese culture with the face painting and the way her lips are done and all that. Very much inspired by the Japanese. There's even hints of kind of other spiritual elements within Star Wars, like what they call like the law of attraction. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but be very mindful of what you're thinking, because you become what you think. And I know Anakin, Obi-Wan was saying that to Anakin when Anakin was kind of being like super negative about, Padme's response to seeing him again after all those years. And Obi-Wan told him, Anakin, you got to be very, very careful, mindful of your thoughts and your feelings. That's a law of attraction sort of mindset there, right? You have to be very weary of what you think, because you can become what you think. And that it's also very consistent with like turning to the dark side. Your thoughts kind of dictate that. So there's a lot of these spiritual kind of correlations within this franchise. What's interesting about Mando is that they're utilizing water a lot, which is interesting. That's very consistent with like Catholicism, with like baptizing and Christianity. I think that's very, very cool. And also just the interpretations of this Mandalorian religion, so to speak, between the two characters, Bo-Katan and Din Djarin. Din is very like hard line, like, no, I gotta redeem myself. I gotta find the waters, yada, yada, yada. He's very much into this. And Bo-Katan is kind of like, it's for kids. Come on. This is kind of it's like it encapsulates kind of like our society, right? Where you have someone who's super religious, who's super into it, and like, okay, I receive communion and all this stuff. I get baptized. And then you have the person who's more of an atheist going, you know what? Come on. These are kid stories. It's symbolism. It means nothing. Right. So it's very much like Michael was saying, representative of our society, of our world. And that's the thing I love about Star Wars. It hits on all these different levels, spiritually, culturally, all this stuff. Lucas notoriously pulled from this stuff. The Jedi, very much modeled after Japanese samurai, the way they dress, the way they behave.
Absolutely.
So I think it's incredible. And it's great to see the Mandalorian kind of continuing that trend, and not just continuing it, but they're all in, and it's fantastic.
And it's really cool it's they make commentary about our world a little bit, right? It's like what is it? Din Djarin's, they're walking through episode 2, right? They're walking through Mandalore, it's all destroyed, and it's like, man, it must really pain you to see it like this. Bo-Katan says, what really pains me is how we just fought and inexplicably, and there's no reason why we did it, and we made it ourselves easy pickings for the Empire. And she's looking for unification, so forth. But yeah, she is kind of like, look, listen, this stuff doesn't matter, whatever.
Right.
Well, and then she goes down to the living waters herself and is amazed by what she sees, and maybe there is something to it. Maybe she changes, and maybe Din Djarin changes as well. It's going to be really fascinating to see it's going to be fascinating to see how that progresses. Go ahead, Jay. Sorry.
No. That's great. That's fantastic. You guys have all said really, really cool stuff. I think that there are a couple. I agree with everything that's been said. I think that it's great to see it in Star Wars. I think that there's some practical reasons for it too. How many of you guys played Knights of the Old Republic?
Definitely,
yeah. Yeah. So did you, OG? Did you play?
I did not know.
Okay.
So get it on your phone. Come on.
I know.
There are quite a few Mandalorian characters in that world, in the Old Republic world. And that Old Republic world has Mandalorian characters who are more brutal than they are friendly and endearing. They are warrior culture to the max, where it's like you walk into their encampment and there's like most of them are fighting each other, just practicing and like sparring and like, and so I think that one of the problems is that we also have to root for these characters. So we can't just have characters who are so brutal, because there's a couple characters in Coder that are so brutal that you're kind of like, I know this. There's one, because you influence the characters around you, and it's like there's one character where you're like, I'm influencing this guy the wrong direction for sure. We're going dark side on this. And I think that if you take the early church and you actually say this is a super oppressed people group, largely in a Roman context, most of them being most of the early church, it did include Romans and Greeks and things like that, but it also was largely Jewish, based on like the followers of Jesus Christ at the time. So this was a very oppressed people group, much like we see the Mandalorians being kind of sort of oppressed. They're all scattered, they're all over the place. And so I think the difference is that the early church wasn't warrior like. Obviously they didn't get the church didn't get warrior like until like you talk about, Dre, the Spanish, and
Or the
also
Crusades.
exactly also what we saw in England and in Europe, where in more of Eastern Europe, where they said we're going to become political as opposed to this being a religion. But in the early church, if you contrast those two things, I think it endears us to them a little bit more as well. It's like, oh, they have a standard of why they're doing this, and some of why they're doing this is to be really good to the people around them, not just to conquer everybody. So I think there's a practical reason there, and I think this gets into a little bit of spoiler territory for episode 2, but you guys both mentioned it, and I think OG, you mentioned, I think all three of you mentioned it. But the setup is sort of perfect, and it's very applicable, like Dre said, to the modern Western world. So right now, if you look at stats about people leaving the church, more people are leaving the church in droves than has ever happened in probably the history of the church. I mean, there's probably been periods where it was like this as well, but in terms of the United States of America, this is the first time. And I think Bo-Katan represents that person, right? This person who's become disenfranchised because the people around her didn't show her it's like, we only are going to be on your side if you've got the dark saber. Like, you got to have the Holy Grail if you want us to show up, right? Like, it's this very disenfranchised character, which I think is really apropos for what a lot of us see today in the world around us, like Michael points out in the chat. And then I also think that you've got the contrast to Bo-Katan is, I think, actually more of the armorer, because the armorer is as fundamentalist as fundamentalist comes. It's like,
As you can
there's
be,
there's no redemption here, bro. You got to go bathe in the living waters that don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
You're screwed, man. Like,
This is the way.
This is the way. And I think basically what happens is that Din Djarin is going to navigate this to bring, and my guess is we're going to see Bo-Katan realize through Din Djarin's sort of faith that there are reasons to join community. There are reasons to have creeds, but that a sect like what we see the armor involved in is fundamentalist and has really gone too far because the rules matter more than the people. And I think that we're going to see that kind of thing start to play itself into this, but I'm definitely here for it. Like, I don't know why they chose it, but it's great. So I'm excited about all that. But that was thanks for going with me there, because you're probably not going to hear many shows. Maybe Bryant's show talk about the religion of Star Wars in this kind of way. But we're going to go there. Now, this is going to take us out of that a little bit to bring us more into the practical reality of today's world in question number 3. Now, since I didn't send the questions to Bryant in advance, I will start with you again, OG, and I'll come back around to you, Bryant.
Sure.
I'll give you a chance to process it. But so OG, Grief Karga gives us 2 quick updates on Cara Dune and Moff Gideon.
Right.
From your standpoint, like, do you find those updates satisfying? And then I'm going to ask that question, but I also want you to answer the question of, do you think there's any chance that those 2 characters specifically, show up again in either future seasons of The Mandalorian or future seasons of something else?
Absolutely. Here's the thing. Okay, so the Cara Dune thing, right? I mean, very controversial situation. Right?
Very controversial.
Very controversial, right? So I thought the way they're going to sort of write her out of this show would be she died off camera, basically. And then she's gone forever. You can never bring her back. She's dead, right? But they didn't do that, did they? They didn't do that. They said she's off, fighting or got recruited, right? So in my opinion, they're not ready to let go of her character. They're leaving that door open just in case, Look, right now we live in a very culturally polarized kind of world, right? And I think maybe, I don't know, the creator, like Filoni, or maybe it's Favreau, I have no idea, understand that this is sort of like a right now kind of trend, right? This kind of culture, the intensity of the division that we live in right now is sort of a trend, right? And so what if we want to bring her back later on, when this whole thing kind of dies down a little bit? And they did that by not killing her off. So I absolutely believe look, they might not bring her back. They might not, but I think there is a desire there to leave that possibility on the table just in case. Because if they were completely done with her and they don't want anything to do with her ever again, they would have just killed her. They would have said she died off camera and that's the end of her. They didn't do that. So I think there's a possibility she'll come back. I was actually very surprised by that, because Disney and that whole thing with her, with Gina Carano. I thought they would really, really close that chapter. You know what I'm saying? And like, lock it with like 15 different padlocks, and we're done with it. They didn't do that. They left that door open a lot wider than I thought they would, in my opinion.
And I think that reflects about maybe a coming change in management, all right? That Kathleen Kennedy, she doesn't have final say over everything, and that is telling. Because I do agree with you, OG. I think they would have killed her off, but the fact that they didn't, I think it is very telling. I guess she's been recruited by special forces. Interesting. Could that be the Rangers of the New Republic? I don't know. We'll see. That maybe that door hasn't completely closed. But yeah, I think they want to kind of leave that open there. I do agree with you. I think the times are changing, not just internally with Lucasfilm and maybe Kathleen Kennedy stepping away pretty soon here, but also too, her comments were related to a situation in time that we're kind of coming out of, right? Softly, and people's opinions about some of the stuff related to it are starting to change. We're seeing that more broadly as time goes on here. So, how we think of Gina Carano, or how we thought of her then, might change upcoming, and especially if it ushers in kind of a new change in management at Lucasfilm. Maybe some different decisions can be made regarding that. But yeah, it is interesting. And to answer your point, Jay, it wasn't completely satisfying, but I get it. All right, throw away line. Let's go in a different direction. But this is also kind of like, hey, when you don't have a Gina Carano that may have made a huge impact in season 3 previously, and now you don't have her, you got to make some changes. So credit to Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau and everybody involved here, kind of pivoting in a way that maybe they weren't expecting to. So good job on that.
Yeah. What do you think, Brian? Were you satisfied with the way that came up, and what do you think about these characters coming back? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute right now.
Sorry. Let me say right now, just because this is the easy one to get out of the way, Giancarlo Esposito, no way he's not coming back. I don't know if it's on Mandalorian. I would be very surprised if he does not return, but he's on board. That character doesn't go away. In regards to Cara Dune, I don't know. I feel slightly different. So I'll add a little bit of my own flavor, I guess. I will say, first off, I think that Disney is still adamantly opposed to her comments. I do think, without getting into details, because I don't think that's really, necessary. We all probably have our own opinion on it, but like the anti-trans and the sort of the Holocaust, minimizing, I don't know that stuff's gonna sail anytime soon. And she seems to have doubled down on it to some degree. For the character, personally, and I hate to say this because I feel like when I don't find myself understanding or attracted to a character from a storytelling perspective, I often want to give it time. I feel like I've followed a lot of TV series where, I'm not really a fan of a character for a while, and then as I begin to understand their purpose in the story structure and what we're trying to convey with the character, I begin to appreciate them, even if they're not a favorite of mine. Cara Dune, I didn't hate her, but she just didn't excite me, I guess, the way that the other characters did. So I'm not incredibly like, oh no, where did she go? And I kind of feel like, and maybe maybe I'm wrong about this, but I kind of feel like she was given a worse sentence than death, because she just is like sort of put back into the package and put back into the toy chest, never to be played with again. I mean, there's a chance that she might show up in a series where they could voice her with another character or with another actor, maybe animated video games or something. But I think honestly that they're like, That's the last we ever heard of Cara Dune. I would be really surprised if she pops up, because I just don't think that she ever got established in the way that she needed to really be a fan favorite character. I know a few friends of mine who really enjoy her, but not that couldn't be recreated with another character. A lot of the elements that she has that are unique, whether it's, her history with Alderaan, or her physical build, or, being a former rebel, all these things can be seen in other characters. So I almost feel like they would rather create something new and move forward and not look back. But, we'll see. We'll see what goes on.
Brian, that's a fair point you're making there. Is she, I hate to say this, but is she expendable, right? Is this character expendable? Is she replaceable? I mean, look, I think they left the door open for her to come back, but I gotta agree. I think she is a little expendable. Like, she's not. I mean, she's not. Let's be honest. She's not a Princess Leia. She's not. I mean, yeah, you're right. You can cast another actress, and you can create a whole new character that could do the job just as well, and maybe even a little bit better. So that's a fantastic point you made there. Absolutely, sir.
I think we're going to get into some of this when we start to talk about the changes that are probably coming to Lucasfilm soon. Some changes that apply to Disney in a broader sense as well. But my feeling on it is this. I lean a little bit more towards what Dre is saying and Dre's take on it. And here's why I feel like it's a possibility. Because first, we saw Navarro in season 2, I believe, in the absence of Cara Dune, if I'm not mistaken. There was, I believe, a scene where she wasn't even there, and we just saw Grief Karga trying to get everything set up. Correct me in the chat if I'm wrong with that, if I'm misremembering that. But so, in other words, they had a chance to address it then. It was probably still too fresh for them to say anything at all. But as far as let's just be honest, what doesn't matter what you think about what Gina Carano said. If you're in favor of it, if you hate it, it doesn't really matter what she said. Her social media presence was the problem with that role, right? Like, so it doesn't matter what was said. She could have said, like, I think Joe Biden's a reptilian alien or something, like she could have said something like that. But the problem would have been still like, why are you saying that? You have one of the biggest shows on television. If someone could just take your phone away for a minute, you would still have one of the biggest shows on television. You'd still be there, right? And I think that this is a problem that we're going to continue to see, because I think what we're kind of experiencing in the real world is this back and forth political battle about where you get a little bit of fame, or even people who don't have fame, let's be honest, really want to make things political statements. And then they actually, by doing so, they engender a portion of the population to them, right? That shares that belief system. And so there's like these weird incentives that apply, whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right. There's these weird incentives from creating tribes. I think, though, that my take on this is that Disney has showcased, we'll talk about this more later, but Disney has showcased that it is attempting to depoliticize a little bit more. It's been highly political. In fact, the takeover of the recent, there was a recent change in the Star Wars account on Twitter, and whoever's managing the Star Wars account, and it got way more progressive. Like it just did. It just gravitated towards that. I think, though, that the part of the problem is that when Chapek started to move the needle in this direction, I think Iger's going to continue to move the needle. They're going to look for where is the revenue and where are we shooting ourselves in the foot with revenue. Right. And they're going to say anybody politicizing anything is going to be, whether it's right or left, doesn't matter. Right. It's going to be shooting ourselves in the foot. Right. So here's where I think there's a possibility of her return. Because this line, because they didn't really mention anything in season 2, and now they have this line in season 3, makes me think that they could have said that she died off camera. They could have said that she doesn't exist anymore. They could have said if they really wanted to go progressive, they could have been like, she just joined the Empire, guys. She's nuts, right?
That's funny.
So since they didn't do any of that, what it makes me think is that in a now, granted, I realize that I'm coming from a bias of really enjoying that character, regardless of Gina Carano and her social media presence. Let's just set that aside. I love the character. So I do come from the opposite bias of Brian. But I think that I could be biased, but I think that what they're doing is they're sort of saying, look, we're not going to close the doors on any characters. But if she's going to come back, I can almost guarantee you they're going to be like, you can't go on Twitter because as soon as you do, like, you're gone. Like, I think that they're going to start clamping down on that more and more. They almost ran into it with Andor when the creators of Andor said it wasn't even the creators of Andor. Sorry. It was one of the actors.
One of the actors, right?
Yeah, on Andor said like, well, this is a show against Trump. And it was like, okay, those kinds of statements, when you alienate a portion of the population that could be paying you, they're just going to start to go, look, guys, we got to stop doing that.
It's a problem.
I think you're right to a degree about that, Jay, but where I see a difference is I think what we have to be clear with Gina Carano is what the problem was is that she said some things. Disney was like, hey, can you not say those things? Like, it's upsetting our audience. And then she went and said them anyways, again, a couple times. Yep. I think with situations like the Andor actor, I think something similar is probably happening, but then that person doesn't go back out and do it. And I think that's the difference that we're seeing. I do think you are right that they want to turn down the temperature a little bit.
Yes.
And I think part of that, I think where I see it slightly different, I think part of that is not killing that character, because wouldn't that be then the news cycle for the next 3 or 4 days is like, look at, the progressive Disney killed off our right-wing character because they got
That's a great point.
That's a great point.
That's fair.
It'd be like sticking a finger in your eye.
There would be hundreds of YouTube videos about it.
It would be the Mandalorian news for the 2 weeks at least.
That's right.
But I do think where I and I hate to do this because I don't want to take away from your hope that the character will come back. The one thing that I agreed with you is I think Disney's going to follow the money. And the one thing, while I do think they'll depoliticize, there seems to be some extreme parties on our right side politics that really want to make things go backwards for the LGBTQ groups in our country. And I just, it's hard for me to imagine Disney being like, we're gonna flirt with that, because I don't know that there's money for them there. Whether we take the morals and the politics out of it, they've already sort of staked their claim as like, we're inclusive. Yeah. We have a lot of people, in our ranks who are from this community. And so what is going to be really interesting is like, what do they do with these changes that have happened recently, in Florida, with them losing the control of the property? Does Iger go to war? Does he back off? Or is it a combination of the two? Is there something where we can't, bring the flames down, but there's still sort of a line in the sand that is drawn that they won't, retreat from, essentially?
Well, they
made one statement, didn't say one again. What does that say? That's it, right? I mean, look, they're not. I don't think they're going to backpedal on LGBTQ plus issues or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But are they necessarily going to poke the bear? Are they necessarily going to go further? Don't really think so. And it's not so much that you are inclusive. It's not so much that you provide that kind of content in the products you produce, right? It's we're gonna proud family it. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna make commentary about this racial group. We're gonna make commentary about this these people in these places and so forth, right? I think that's where it's like, now it's not necessarily inclusive, it's more exclusive. Now you're kind of, making people agitated. Now people are kind of pulling back. I think that kind of stuff is where they're going to be like, hang on a second. we can't necessarily, like Jay said, right? We can't make statements that might hinder the reach of the product because of what might be featured therein. That kind of stuff, I think they might go a little bit, take a little bit
and that applies.
a step back from that.
And that applies to Gina Carano because if you're out there putting down a portion of so this is what's so fascinating, right? I agree with you, Bryant, that I don't think they're going to tolerate that moving forward because it's just cutting out a different portion of their revenue stream, right? Like in other words, Disney is such a large company that to a certain extent they need to attract be as inclusive as possible and attract as many people as they can. And there's no reason not to do that. They're incentivized to do that. So I think maybe I think that there's a perception amongst some fans that if the needle swung this way towards this group, that it's going to swing back this way. And I don't think that's the case. If the needle's going to try to go back to it's going to go right back to center. It's not going to try and go either way, because if you go either way, you cut out your audience, you limit your revenue. So, it sounds very practical, but it is what it is. Go ahead.
Very quickly, I always heard the saying, "Hey, Crest toothpaste, they sell to murderers on death row." It's like, not to say that they appeal to them directly, but it's not to say that they, let's say, put out a public statement saying we don't want our products being used by these people. They just don't say anything at all, right? And that's how they widen the reach as wide as possible. Now, we could all have disagreements with that morally, ethically, and so forth, right? And Disney does view itself as a progressive company. I don't think it's necessarily changing. However, how overt and how active they are might, and that's kind of the key issue.
And they're not going to tolerate the people that they hire. Yeah. Going and being bold in they can be inclusive. They can say I love this group and I want to be for this group. But as soon as you say no, that group's no good, then you're going to run into trouble with the mouse. Like it's going to be what it's going to be.
Even before the Gina Carano thing, I was saying, hey, look, listen, you got to have a kind of contract stipulation where you're not gonna, endanger the product with your comments on social media. Like, you cannot do that, right? And I think that is coming. We'll see.
That's got to be coming. All right, so let's talk about. We're like halfway through my questions. I know, Bryant, you're gonna run up against a deadline here in a minute, so
sure.
I'll get some of your takes on this. I'm gonna come back to this one in a minute because I'm gonna move forward to episode 2, but Dre and OG remind me to come back to this one because these guys are the parks experts, and I want to ask them a little bit about Navarro. And everybody I talk to thinks Navarro looks a lot like Batuu. What's going on there? So we'll come back to that one. But let's transition into episode 2 real quick because I'll start with you, Bryant, so we can get your take on it. What's your 1 to 10 rating on episode 2, and what's your reasoning behind that rating?
I would really, it deserves a 10. I'm going to go 9, but, because I'm trying to go like, hey, well, there's who knows what's around the other corner. And then you start comparing like, well, was it as good as this episode? But just, on instinct, yeah, it's a 10. Like, this is what the show should be. This is what has made us love the show. Everything, there are things I could complain about in the episode. I know I saw someone, doing a video a day or two ago about, we're going back to Tatooine again or whatever, and there's always, little nitpicks you can have, but the show was once again, it's our characters of Grogu and Din Djarin, the same, but different. Like, one thing that I found a lot of people saying, oh, here's the Mandalorian, the same as always, except we have the very key difference that he is now training Grogu as a Mandalorian. This is no longer like, you are kind of my kid. You've fallen into my kid. You are now accepted as my child. I am training you in my ways. And it changes the dynamic just slightly. Absolutely. And, and it ties into the themes that we're talking about with Bo-Katan and what the Mandalorians are, what it is to be a Mandalorian. We see epic, awesome visuals of Mandalore at this point that are just fantastic. I feel stuff that every time I see it, I'm like, I know people look at this and then move on, but like, it blows my mind that this is a television series,
Absolutely.
that we're having Star Wars like this. It's amazing. Whether we're viewing it from the spaceship coming in to going underneath. And then when we get to things like just, again, bringing Bo-Katan back in and discussion about what is it to mean to be a Mandalorian? What are we without the creed? That stuff's like, the juiciest stuff for me. I think that's the stuff I want to hear discussed. That's the stuff I want to dig into with this series, especially in a third season where we're really defining like what is it going to be, being a Mandalorian going forward. And the last thing I will just say is obviously, like, we didn't have a big quote unquote hook in the first episode, but the Mythosaur, like, peak. What an ending, not only just like, oh my God, what a visual, like star beast for us to see,
Right.
but also the implications because of what this means, that if there is still a living Mythosaur, what does that mean for Bo-Katan's worldview about what can be done to bring Mandalore? How does that change Din Djarin's worldview? How does that change things for the Armorer and that entire cult? Just really interesting stuff. And I'm glad that we're 2 episodes in and we're digging into this. We're not still doing setup. So yeah, definitely 9-10 is where I land.
Oh wow, that's your enthusiasm is making me want to put a higher rating on mine. But before we go into the other 2 guys, since you're going to take off in a minute, why don't you tell the folks again where they can find you, like what you're up to, what you suggest they read from Fanbase Press, that kind of stuff.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Comic Book Slayer or on Instagram at Comic Book Sniffer. Fanbase Press is at fanbasepress.com, or look for us on Twitter, Instagram as well. The project that I guess I would shout out for right now is Ripple Effects. We've just released a new superhero story. It was named one of the top stories from the American Library Association for this year. And the story is about a superhero who has a invincible. His power is that he's invincible to all physical damage, but he also happens to be someone who suffers from type 1 diabetes. And so we have a really interesting story here where someone has a body that is their greatest asset, but also something that is their greatest weakness, and really explores not only what it takes to be a superhero, but invisible illnesses on a whole. So check it out at fanbasepress.com.
That's super cool. And then I will actually be podcasting with Brian about The Mandalorian coming back up after the season is over. So definitely catch up with us over there as well. Check out the Fanbase Press podcast channel as well. It's fantastic stuff. I was on a show with Barbara talking about To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes, great episode.
Super in depth, really fantastic conversation. I love those kind of conversations. So thank you, Bryant. And you can bounce whenever you need to. I just want to make sure that you got a chance to say your piece there.
Great, thank you.
Brian, you're fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. Seriously, a fantastic discussion.
Thank you so much. I wish I could stay longer. All 3 of you, if you ever want to come on the Fanbase Weekly, just reach out to me. I'd love to set it up. And if you want more Star Wars conversation, I'm happy to join you anytime. So
Absolutely.
I'll be standing by.
Awesome.
You're always welcome on the channel, Brian. Always
absolutely.
welcome.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Well, good luck with the conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
you.
Thank you.
So Bryant came in and said, "Man, that's a 10. That's a straight up 9 or a 10." OG, where are you landing on this? What's your scale of 1 to 10?
Hey, look, I'm kind of following in Brian's footsteps. I'm not going to go as far as a 10. I mean, that's perfection, and I don't think it's quite there, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going a solid 9. I really loved this episode. Number one, it was packed full of adventure, and I know that sounds really cheesy, but it really felt kind of like old school. Like the energy was almost like the Temple of Doom, like this old school, like Spielberg, like adventure movies or something. And every time you thought it was cool, like Mando would get sucked under the water, or that crab thing would grab him, right? There's all these like surprises along the way. I'm like, oh man, that's crazy, Loved it. Absolutely loved this episode. It was phenomenal. I think it was really, really kind of cool how I think, well, and we're going to talk about this, I think in another question, but this whole idea that Mandalore is inhabitable, it has breathable air and what have you. I'm telling you, that opens the floodgates for the possibility of this season. I think that's going to be the main, and I'm kind of answering one of the questions already right now, but I think that's going to be the main plot line thread going forward with this whole season. I think it's really, really interesting. I loved that cool, like eye creature.
Yeah.
that thing was dope. That kind of gave me a little bit like General Grievous vibes a little bit. Like,
I was thinking the same thing.
Right? He was creepy as hell. And it was scary because like you thought he was dead, but then he like crawls over to the next body and he just wild stuff, man. I loved it. Another thing I love about it is the dynamic. And this is the most important thing. The dynamic between Grogu and Din, right? Like you said, Jay, no, I'm sorry. I think it was Brian actually who said, season 1 and 2, it was kind of like Mando protecting little Grogu. Yeah. Grogu's coming into his own now. He serves more of a purpose now, right? Like, when he was captured, little Grogu went and got Bo-Katan, brought her back. He went on that little mission by himself. You didn't really see any of that in season 1 or 2. So he's evolving as a character, and we're also seeing him evolve with his powers. Episode 1, he went full prequel Yoda when he leaped out of the ship and so we're seeing an evolution of this character. He's no longer just the cute little thing that's like the sidekick that's there just to look cutesy. He's actually serving a purpose. He's getting he's evolving as a character, and this episode did a great job of showcasing that, and I just had a ball with this episode. Also, another cool thing was those weird like Planet of the Apes like monkeys in the mine. Yep. They were kind of cool looking, and I don't know. I just had a blast with this episode. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. I'm sticking to it.
Nice, 9 out of 10. What do you think? What do you think, Dre? What are we at over here?
I think 9. I think we got to give it a 9. I mean, this was really, really well done. Like you said, OG, the dynamic between Mando and Grogu is a really kind of interesting thing. Obviously, we saw a little bit of that develop in episode 1, but episode 2, we saw him become kind of an autonomous character, right? Where he's kind of he's making his own decisions. He's he's kind of becoming a more active player that is always very, very strong. And I think it's where the character should go because he can't just be the cute little puppet. Like he's got to be, we had to develop him a little bit more. And it's interesting too when I believe in episode 7 of Book of Boba Fett, when Grogu is given the decision, hey, you want to stick with me, I'll give you this lightsaber, or you can go to Din Djarin and go back with him, here's a little suit of armor for you. That's also, I think that was also him saying, hey, look, listen, who are you going to train with? What identity are you going to take on? And so I think it's very appropriate that dynamic between the two characters is here, and that's why kind of, Din Djarin's kind of leading them the way. Very, very cool, but oh my gosh, you got to see. I mean, OG, can you share my screen just for 1 second?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Look at this shot. Look at that. That is incredible. Like what? That is super cool. Again, this is for a streaming series. I mean, this is pretty awesome. And moreover, let's see if I can get to there. Okay, I can't play this at all, by the way. We will get so copyright struck, it'd be ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
But
especially because it's a new episode.
Yeah, exactly, right. But when he leaves during the I mean, that shot right there.
Good to Eve, man.
Oh my goodness gracious. That is unbelievable, So they're having fun with it, they're really doing some kind of creative, innovative stuff. I love it. They're incorporating more of the lore. They're expanding their horizons. I mean, if you go into the depths of this planet here, obviously the creatures, right? But just I mean, look at that. That is just absolutely
Crazy.
incredible. I was like blown away because the only place I had ever seen this was with Clone Wars, and to kind of see it in live action, but this kind of post-apocalyptic version of it, super cool setting, super cool place. I absolutely, you got to give this season high marks. Also, Bo-Katan really coming into her own here. You know, we had seen her in Clone Wars, seen her in Rebels. We know she's capable, but we haven't seen a lot of that, and she handles herself awesomely here. Darksaber, one hand, shield in the other, like we've seen in the Clone Wars. That was awesome to see that kind of capitalized here with her character. Just a really good, phenomenal one all around. Even the dialogue choices, like we have gone over for the majority of this show. You know, I mean, really kind of expand the horizons in terms of even just this conversation, right? The cerebral part of this whole thing. And not perfect, right? I mean, you know, it's like, how many times are we going to go in this cave? What, two times, 3 times, you know? You know, maybe that could have been shortened up a little bit, but obviously the droid has to be there. OG, I think you make a great prediction right there. The air quality being good, right? What does that mean for the future of Mandalore? I think that's very, very interesting. Some of the dialogue, little rough. Some of even Bo-Katan's delivery could have been improved on, right? Just small little things. But ending it on the great mythosaur in the waters, like what the armor talks about. Ooh, buddy, I am all in for episode 3.
Well, you know, the interesting thing too, that was kind of like, this is a very nitpicky criticism, and it's actually kind of going back to episode 1. So the IG-11 thing, I thought was kind of, and maybe it'll come back in other episodes, but I felt like that was kind of a waste of time. Like, Mando was so focused on like, oh, I need IG-11. No, I can't take an alternative droid. I need him, you know? And then he goes to this scrapyard lady, and he just takes another droid at the end of the day.
I know.
Like, so what was that all about? That was a little weird. But knowing Filoni, I think he was seed planting there, and I think IG-11 is gonna make his mighty return sometime later in the season. But I just thought that was as a standalone episode kind of thing. I thought that was a little clunky, a little weird. I don't know. I didn't dig that.
Yeah, in fact, you're lining up to like where so you guys have convinced me that I was being a little bit too negative, because I had it at a 7.5, and I'm putting it up to an 8.
No,
yeah, putting it up to an 8.
The creature designs alone gives it an 8. Come on, Jay.
Well, let me just say with the problems I had with it, and then we'll go from, because the problems I had with this episode are largely coming from episode 1. So that was one of, you just pointed it out, OG. Like, there was a lot put on the IG-11 resurrection, and that went absolutely nowhere. Like, it didn't, not only did it go nowhere, like, it made no sense where it actually went to by him choosing the other droid. A droid that doesn't look capable at all of going into any mines. And, you know, so I felt like that was odd, but that again was an episode 1 kind of problem. The other thing, I love Amy Sedaris in that role. I think that she's really fun, but that scene was very long, and I felt awkward to me. It almost felt like that scene should have been a part of episode 1, and then him showing up there would have ended episode 1. But then it was like, well, that's not enough of a cliffhanger, so we can't really do that. So that just felt a little awkward to me. Those are really the only 2 complaints that I have. But just so you guys understand how much I love this show, I mean, at 10, they've hit 10 multiple times on this show. And so I just have this expectation of what they can deliver that's maybe not fair to them. But let me just be more positive. Some of the things I really love.
She's jetpacking through the water. And a mythosaur shows up. Come on, how can you not love that? No, go ahead. Great.
Well, okay, so I love the tension between Bo-Katan and Din. We're going to talk about that a little bit more coming up. I love that tension. I love the fights. Now, the fights on the Mandalorian series have been, for me, a little bit hit or miss depending on who's directing. I can't remember her last name. I believe her first name is Rachel something directed this episode, I believe, right? If I'm not mistaken. She did an amazing job of directing, particularly the fights. The fact that when Din tries to use the Darksaber, he's clunky, he can barely figure it out. But yet when Bo-Katan uses the Darksaber, she's like full on expert samurai. I mean, I thought that was amazing. There was a little piece of this. We're going to talk about this a little bit more too, about when we talk about what our predictions are for some of the shows. But I think that they just hinted at Grogu's character arc through season 3 in season 2, because Bo-Katan turns around and she says, "You can't be afraid." What do we know about people who are Force users who start to become afraid?
That's a good point.
Going down a dark path, and I think that Grogu may find some darkness in his future that he has to overcome.
Now that's an interesting concept, Jay. That's fascinating. I mean, the idea, and that's actually a really ballsy move on Lucasfilm's part. You're taking this character who is seen as like oh my God, he's so cute, and you're and you're flipping him to like, a Sith Lord or something. I think that's crazy risky, and I love it.
It's interesting you say that, Jay. I think in season 1, kind of near the end there, when Cara Dune and the Requay and Din Djarin were all kind of hanging out together, right? Remember what Grogu did? He force script Cara Dune right there, right? So it's a little bit like, it's not all cute rays and sunshine. There's a darker side here, and don't be afraid. It's an interesting idea. About it.
Dre, I think you need to do your voice changer and say, "You're going down a path I can't follow."
Oh, whoa, I see. Actually, you know what? Let me see here. Let me see. Hang on. I might.
You have that one? Let that drop?
Oh, do I have it? Yeah, here we go.
You're going down a path I can't follow.
There it is.
Grogu, what are you doing, buddy? Okay, so let's talk about. I have a couple more questions, but since we've got so much left to talk about, I'm going to collapse these questions a little bit more. So rather than asking, I have a question because I want to know a little bit about what's going on with Bo-Katan and how she's going to relate to Din. I also want to talk about what could happen in the rest of this season. So let's just talk about in general where we think this season is going. Anybody in particular have a place they want to kick it off? Like where do you think things are going?
I think where it's going is I touched upon it a little bit ago, but I think it's going to be the kind of like the reestablishing of Mandalore. I think that's going to be like the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be seeing going forward. I think that there's a lot of potential there. The tension between Din and Bo, I think that's going to be really where it's at. Also, I think another thing we're going to see a lot of is the the evolution of Grogu. I think we're going to start to see him come more into his own, and I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. So I think that's where it's going. And it's interesting because Filoni has a way of like, at least for me personally, right? He has a way of like, okay, he'll start off like for example, like episode 1 of this season. It's okay, right? It's a 7, right? Or whatever, 6.57. He has a tendency to do that with a lot of these shows. For me personally, like even the first episode of like Rebels was like, okay. It's not like amazing, it's okay. But by the end, you're like, oh my God, you're super invested, right?
Yeah, like you're in
it, Yes. So Filoni has that. He knows how to do that, and I can feel with this this season is gonna be that. It's gonna be one of those things where it's like, I'm telling you, like episode 2 got me hooked. Like I was all in on that. After that episode, I was like, oh, I can't wait till next week, already. So I think this is gonna be a banger season, and I think again, just to kind of wrap it up. The establishment of the reestablishment of Mandalore and little Grogu, his evolution is going to play a big part in all of this.
Yes, Grogu, I think is going to be a big part of it. you had a question later on. I don't know if you were going to ask it, but there's a scene in a pivotal scene in Mandalorian season 2, the Siege, chapter 12, where they go into Cara Dune, Din Djarin, and Carl with his character Greek Karga. They go into like a kind of an Imperial installation, and they find out, what are they doing? Like, what is this blue thing here? What is going on? And then, Moff Gideon is like, hey, I need the, little kid's blood or whatever, right? The little one's blood. Yeah. And it's like, is that going to come up here? I think where they're going is to reestablish Mandalore, for sure. Reestablish the people and provide an army. Why do they need an army? Because I think Ahsoka will go into why they need an army. That Thrawn has returned, as has been kind of hinted at, especially in her debut episode in Mandalorian. And I think they're going to need to fight against Thrawn and the threat he poses now in this kind of post-Imperial world. So I think that's where this whole thing is going. But in order to have that, you have to reestablish Mandalore. How do you do that? Somebody has to wield the Darksaber. Somebody has to mount that Mythosaur. And here we go. And reunite the clans.
You have actually helped me come to terms with bringing other subplots that I didn't know where to put them into a centralized location. Because if we go the route of having Grand Admiral Thrawn show up as Grand Admiral Thrawn with a complete fleet, now we have a reason why Boba Fett needs to take over Tatooine.
Yep.
Now we have a reason why Navarro needs to be defended from the pirates.
True.
Because that's coming back. The pirates are going to come back and play a role in Navarro.
Of course.
And now we have a reason why Mandalore needs to be united. Because if Thrawn is coming, one planet, even if it's full of Mandalorians, is not going to do it. Like, you got to have a whole system kind of just getting together and being like, we got to stand up against this.
And let's not underestimate that the Jedi will also probably play a role in that, like they did.
Yes.
Everybody remembers the Thrawn trilogy.
Yep.
But there was a Timothy Zahn book set a couple of years later where the idea was Thrawn was going to be cloned and come back. I think they're kind of reevaluating that and going, here we go, here's what we do. And by that time, the Jedi Academy was a little bit more established. We know that Jon Favreau's comments says that these things take over the course of a couple of years. Look, if we got the Jedi back in, if we've got the Mandalorians back in, remember, Bo-Katan says, hey, the Jedi and the Mandalorians, we fought side by side in a couple of things. I don't know if you knew that, but we actually did, right? It's like, what is that hinting at? There might not be enemies. They might be friends, at least at this time, with this kind of unified threat they have to kind of they kind of have to face. Tatooine, right? I think we're going to something pretty big here.
I want to ask you, fellas. I want to ask you fellas something, because in I forget if it was I forget if it was episode 1 or episode 2. I think it was episode 2 when they were when they were in Lightspeed, Din and little Grogu.
Yes,
we saw the space whales.
We did.
Saw the space whales. Now, Dre, you mentioned you think Thrawn might be involved in this. Is that Filoni and Favreau sort of planting the seeds? Because last time we saw Thrawn, I believe it was the space whales, and he was with Ezra, right?
He was
in
with
Rebels.
Ezra, yeah. And remember, Ahsoka and what is her name? Sabine Wren went off to find Ezra, and now Ahsoka, removed from that incident, is talking about what's going on with Thrawn. Like, what, we've made that connection, right? And like you said, the space whales were the kind of connecting piece right there. Is that hinting to an overarching story that we're going to? I think we are.
Yeah.
Good observation there, OG. I forgot. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. Well, one other thing I would say based on that too is that we know, like, so the plot where they were trying to extract something from Grogu, we don't know what it was they were trying. That kind of fizzled, right? It kind of fizzled out over the course of time. But one of the things we've seen in a lot of the video games that's always really fun and cool is that somehow the Empire has started to enlist Sith acolytes that are not related to the rule of two, right?
Correct.
And you have to end up fighting all of these acolytes. One of the things that I think could happen here is that under Thrawn, who doesn't give a shit about the rule of two, he could extract something from Grogu and start to implant that in soldiers that gives them some level of force capability that he then is overseeing as he launches his invasion, which would then cause for more Jedi to get involved. And they can't lose Grogu to the dark side if that's the case, because they're going to need him to fight against all of these acolytes.
It's interesting. I think Jedi Outcast talked about that a little bit, right? Jedi Academy with the Reborn and the Shadow Troopers, if I'm not mistaken, right? So that has been explored. We know that there is a way to do that. That would be quite cool right there. But interestingly, Thrawn, his whole thing, at least with the expanded universe, was he didn't care really about the Empire or its mission. He felt that the Empire was most capable for holding back the Yuuzhan Vong. That was his whole thing, and we know that invasion did a lot of stuff to some established characters, the New Republic itself, all that kind of stuff. There's all those possibilities as well, but that's down the line. I'm just telling you, if this is pursued, it could get really interesting really fast.
Well, and Favreau has already pulled from the games because he brought us the super dark troopers, right? The dark troopers. Brought those into it. He brought the dark troopers into it, and so I think that there's reason for us to be very, very excited about where everything is going. So I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. It's really gonna be a great time. Michael Ebba here says, I hope they make Thrawn look as cool as they did Cad Bane. Oh, absolutely. Cad Bane was like one of my favorite things about Book of Boba Fett. Loved him.
Yeah.
Too good. I think that was a test. Just saying, hey, does a character like this work?
Right.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's transition. We've been going for quite a long time. We've been breaking this show down. I've got extra questions, but I'll save those for even future episodes because we're going to do this every Thursday after the episode comes out. So we'll hang out with you guys live. We can talk about this stuff. But let's like shift now into some of the rumors that are coming out of Lucasfilm and what those rumors could mean for the future of Star Wars. Who wants to kick us off with this?
Go ahead, Dre. You start off. Let's get the party started.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lucasfilm first, then Parks, right?
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, we just talked about timelines, and what there is kind of this Mandoverse here, right? This kind of this section of the timeline that is building towards something bigger. But does that intersect with the sequel trilogy? Because obviously at this point it would have to. And they've already taken sequel trilogy iconography, creatures, characters, all that kind of stuff, and have integrated it in here already. So we know that timeline exists. And those characters and those creatures exist and all that. But are we necessarily going towards that? Or is there a chance for a bifurcation? It's interesting, right? Here we go. This comes from Cameron Pasha via his Sparrow contact, which apparently is. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Well, I was just saying, kind of set up for the audience in case they're not familiar what Sparrow is exactly.
Yeah, that is Cameron Pasha's inside person at Lucasfilm. Apparently, he alludes to them being a kind of higher up executive who would kind of be privy to a lot of this information. Apparently, they actually met. So this is not some rando on the internet. Apparently, this is somebody that Cameron swears by. They've met. They've verified that, yes, they actually do work at Lucasfilm, and that just them communicating at all could, it could cost Sparrow their job, let's just say, right? So, okay, that's kind of the groundwork right here. This is what they say. Okay, Sparrow reveals what is really happening with Rey. So I just got back word from my Disney insider Sparrow on the future of Rey in Star Wars. And the news is both surprising and not surprising at all. And here's what they said. Quote, she is being considered to be brought in for Ahsoka, but just for her Thanos moment when the timeline is changed. End quote. That's all that Sparrow says. Cameron extrapolates from that. The eye of Pasha has pierced the dark cloud to reveal the truth. Jon Favreau is indeed considering bringing Daisy Ridley back for the Ahsoka series, but only as part of his effort to erase the original timeline in which she existed. While Rey's brief return may shock and perhaps outrage some fans, it makes perfect sense from a writer's perspective. In order to show the old timeline erased, we need to see it and know its implications. Erasing the sequel timeline will lead to Rey never being born, and that has to be dealt with dramatically. As a writer, I would tie it up in a similar fashion in order to make sure no questions remain as to whether the old timeline is still in play. And it also creates dramatic gravitas for the character of Ahsoka, knowing that her choice to end one timeline will save millions of lives, while ending the lives of others who only existed because of Palpatine's escape from death. And perhaps Rey will have a heroic moment where she encourages Ahsoka to go through with it, and thus sacrificing herself for the galaxy, and finally getting to be a true heroine. This may not be the news that everyone wanted to hear, but it makes sense from a storyteller's perspective, and I trust that Jon Favreau will finally give Daisy Ridley, a fine actress, a script where she can show her full range of emotions, depth, and growth as a thespian. Miss Ridley deserved better than the garbage script she was given in the sequel trilogy. That's a little bit of a writer's interpretation there, and I hope she gets a dignified send-off that she can be proud of. Guys, what are we thinking about this?
This is risky. I mean, this is risky, but okay. There's pros and cons to doing this. Absolutely. Okay, you're basically going to kind of, well, you're not kind of, you're retconning the sequel trilogy, right? There's a pro side to this where they can get a second chance at doing this right. But we all know, I mean, every fan knows that they didn't really have a plan going into the sequel trilogy. Every director kind of did its own thing, and it kind of led to a mess, right? So by kind of going down this path of story devising, kind of retconning the sequel trilogy, it gives Filoni and Favreau a chance to do their sequel trilogy, mapping it out from the beginning and doing it better than what we got originally. Okay, so that sounds great, but there are risks involved. Number one, if you don't stick the landing this time, that's like catastrophic for the franchise. I mean, catastrophic.
There's no redemption there if you screw it up.
There's no redemption. I mean, you completely nuked the franchise. Now, another thing that I think would be really, really unfortunate is that we don't have Carrie Fisher around anymore.
Yeah.
So if they were to kind of do a redo of the sequel trilogy, it would be they would have her character, I'm sure, but it would probably be an AI or something. That's unfortunate, in my opinion. That's really disappointing. But I don't know. I mean, look, I've been a big proponent of, like, you don't need to retcon the sequel trilogy. What you can do, what kind of George Lucas did with the prequels. And what George Lucas did with the prequels is that he created ancillary material that sort of filled in the blanks and gave a little more context to the prequels that made the prequels better. So the Clone Wars show made the prequel era better. People appreciated the prequels more because of the Clone Wars. I think you could do a similar thing with the sequels, because there are good things in the sequels. They're not all bad. A lot of the characters are great. I love Ben Solo and Kylo. You know, there's good stuff there. If you create, like, let's say a Disney Plus show, or even maybe like a standalone movie that's sort of filling in some gaps and sort of making the sequel trilogy story tighter, I think that would work, and you wouldn't have to reboot necessarily. So I don't know. I'm open to really creative, bold ideas. I'm not completely averse to retconning the sequel trilogy and kind of going in a different direction if they have a really dope idea for it. But I don't necessarily think it's necessary. I think you could do the George Lucas prequel direction as well. But that's kind of where I stand. Fascinating, theory though, or notion. I mean, it's crazy to even think about.
Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, if I were Disney, the only way that I touch the sequel trilogy at all is in what OG said, is working around it without retconning it. And the reasons for that is because, look, it's sort of similar to the Cara Dune conversation, if we're being honest. any kind of retconning that comes with it is gonna bring all the videos, all the attention, all the it's just sometimes you should just let sleeping dogs lie. And if you've got other people who look, I would watch, let's be really clear. The problem with the sequel trilogy had nothing to do with you know, John Boyega as Finn. It had nothing to do with Daisy Ridley as Rey. It had nothing to do with Oscar Isaac as Poe Dameron. Those were really interesting characters played by really talented individuals. Kylo Ren played by Adam Driver. But the story was a disaster, right? Yeah. I think that you ignore that altogether and that you work around it. I don't think you're ever going to get Harrison Ford back in another movie. Are you kidding me? After you did what you did with him in this one, I think he's good. You're obviously not going to, rest in peace, Carrie Fisher. We can't get her back. Right. I think that the only person who's more willing to come back into a role would be Mark Hamill. Right. Mm-hmm. But I think you could easily do a show that Mark Hamill is older and working with Daisy in some way, shape, or form. Right. Like, I think you could tell those stories, but I don't think that it's going to touch, whether or not Palpatine came back, how Palpatine is related to Rey or not related. I just don't think you even go there. Right. Like, come up with new villains, put those people against new villains. It's good. We're fine. We forget it. We go, that was a bummer. We move on from it. That's kind of my take on it. Now, I understand Disney's motivation in trying to get people back to an excitement about the sequel trilogy because of the Batuu conversation. That's really what that comes down to, is they have a park area that is maybe not underperforming, but it's definitely not performing as well as it could if it had a different era associated with it, or if the sequel trilogy had managed to land the plane well and people were excited about it. So I think that from my perspective, they do need to do something. Now, see, in my personal view of things, going backwards is better than going forwards, because you can go back to there is not a single person that I've ever heard say, you know what I really hate about Star Wars? The Old Republic stuff. There's no one has ever said that. Yeah.
Nobody.
So I think for me personally, I go, look, you got a lot more ability to branch out by going backwards than you do by going forwards.
Of course.
So that's kind of where I think Disney should kind of hang out or angle their storytelling. But I would not be opposed to Daisy Ridley coming back as Rey or Poe Dameron or whatever.
You know what I would love, though, in terms of ancillary material for the sequel trilogy? I would love like a really short, maybe like a 3 or 4 episode miniseries for D+. Get Ian McDermott back and have the whole, I would like to see his whole contingency plan kind of better explained. Like that was one of the things in the sequel trilogy that I thought was really lackluster. Like, somehow Palpatine returned. I think Poe literally says that. It wasn't explained well. It was kind of gobbledygook. I kind of want to get in Palpatine's head. I want to see what was going on with that. That's kind of interesting to me. And I just love Palpatine. So it'd be great to see him in a series. Go ahead, Dre.
I think because here's the thing. I do agree with you, Jay. I think backwards rather than forwards is the natural place to go. That's why they're kind of dipping their toes into a little bit of the High Republic. Okay, all right. OG. Play Knights of the Old Republic, and you tell me where they should go. All right. Once you're done with that, you're gonna be like, what? I didn't even know this existed. Yeah. Okay.
It's like Game of Thrones with lightsabers, basically, right?
It's so good. I'm telling you, it's so good. And the Mandalorian and Jedi conflicts and the Sith. Okay. So, all right. I think the way to go forward is not to completely retcon and throw out the sequel trilogy. It obviously exists, but if you want to bifurcate the timeline and say the Mandoverse is going in this direction, even though this still exists in some continuity and on Blu-ray, okay. I think I think that can go. And the upside to doing that is, well, if you like the sequel trilogy, still there. And if you like where this is going to go, here's a route for this to take. You can capitalize on maybe some of the promises that were made for the sequel trilogy, do them better, because there are some concepts in there that like could be really cool. Now you have a way to capitalize on those and to make people excited about the sequel trilogy again, like you said, Jay. But also too, because you don't have a destination, that journey can take all the routes it wants to go. And so it kind of opens you up a little bit and says, hey, this just because we're progressing through the years towards a sequel trilogy type place in the timeline doesn't mean we're going to hit the beats like you think we are going to. Like, it was the same thing that the prequel trilogy, let's say, was bound by, right? Eventually we know where everybody ends up, and that's kind of what makes that kind of thing unfortunate. But hey, if you have like a Daisy Ridley, maybe not Daisy Ridley, but maybe like a Poe die at some place where he wasn't supposed to, it's like, like now this is interesting. Like this, now we can, anything can happen kind of thing. And I think they want that, but the sequel trilogy as it exists today prevents that from happening unless they can bifurcate. And there are systems in place in Star Wars that can allow them to do just that.
That's interesting.
They also like from a standpoint of where they could go with things, the nice thing about the sequel trilogy is that it is not galaxy encompassing. It is two fairly small factions. We don't get a big faction until Palpatine says, "I'm like raising the dead of like the every you know what I mean?" Like,
well, that was the confusing part, because Last Jedi was like, "Oh my God, they're taking over the entire galaxy," and it's like,
well, that's the problem.
We don't see that. Yeah, there was no. We need to zoom out, and they just never did that with.
Well, in the first couple films, they even made a point of saying, "Look, these two factions just keep fighting each other, but they're kind of both small and don't have a lot of consequence. Not the way the Empire does in the original trilogy, or the way the Republic does in the prequel trilogy. Those are those are like, I say global force, but you know what I mean? Like they're universe wide, galactic wide forces." Whereas in the sequel trilogy, you got the impression that there could be a lot of stories going on that
are more interesting. No, joking.
Well, definitely could be more interesting for sure, but also less. Like you could easily take the Acolyte series, let's say, and say it's going to be in the sequel trilogy timeline, and it's going to be about something that's really, really important that doesn't have anything to do with the First Republic and doesn't have anything to do with the Resistance, and it would be very compelling. I don't think you need to have it. I mean, look what they did with Mandalorian. This whole time in this Mandalorian timeline, like. He's not worried about what the He's not worried about any of this stuff. So I think you can do some pretty compelling stuff in there. And actually, Michael brings up a really good question, Dre. How would that work? What are the? You said that there were some things that exist in the Star Wars universe that could allow the bifurcation to happen in a way that is not too awkward. What are some of those things?
Yeah, so I think the obvious one. Well, I mean, we've had this thing before where it's like, well, this exists in Legends, and now this is no longer continuity. This exists in some timeline, but it's not ours that we're actively working on, right? So, like they've done that kind of thing before, not with their own product, although they could. The other kind of obvious thing is there's a Worlds Between Worlds type device. I believe it was introduced in Rebels. Originally, that you can kind of play with, and things happen there. Let's just say that. Look up that episode. I encourage everybody to watch it. But that's kind of a way that this kind of thing can happen, in which you bring a character out, like Daisy Ridley, for example, from that timeline, and say, "Hey, look, listen. What happens in the future, because I'm getting bad premonitions about something that might happen." It's like, oh, let me tell you. Go to the World Between Worlds, which Ahsoka was part of, by the way. I think that's why Ahsoka, the TV series, people are kind of making the connections. Okay, like she was brought in via the World Between Worlds. I think, wasn't she was having her sparring match with Darth Vader at that time. And
yes.
Was it Ezra
who pulled her out?
Pulled her out of it? Okay, yeah. I'm trying to remember that. That's kind of how that can work as well. Look, is it going to be clean? Probably not. But I think people are more invested in the Mandoverse right now than at all with the sequel trilogy. I think people can understand that. And honestly, we've had some time, some distance between where we are right now and where the last movie took place in 2019.
Well, I'll tell you what they can do tomorrow if they wanted to do the World Between Worlds kind of idea, to kick off another timeline. There's the moment when Rey is in the cave in The Last Jedi, and she does the clicking, and then all the clicking goes across. All you have to do is spin the camera around and show all those rays leaving and going in different directions.
Oh, that's cool.
And then there's your scene. You can go into whatever you want to with Rey at that point, because she doesn't go the same direction in all the possibilities.
I know. Yeah, you could totally do it.
Yeah, they've got the opportunity to do it, but
that's why leadership, and we'll get into leadership, but that's why leadership is very important, because Star Wars has an infinite amount of potential. And a lot of people say Star Wars is dead. It's not dead. It's not dead. When they do Star Wars right, we see how powerful Star Wars is. Look at Grogu, like one of the most influential things in pop culture in the longest time. When Star Wars is done right, it's huge. I just think that they haven't been making the right product necessarily, and that's why it's falling flat. It's kind of like Disney animation in the 80s, right before Little Mermaid, even in the 70s. The films weren't doing well. They were flopping at the box office. Like Care Bears movie was outperforming Disney. It wasn't that people hated Disney animation in the 70s and 80s. It was that they weren't making a product people were really into. The franchise was hibernating. Same thing with Star Wars. If you can tap into something, it can be huge. It would dwarf Marvel. It really would, if you do it right.
And Micah, but that's basically what it would be, like an MCU multiverse. But here's the thing about this, okay? And OG, you just said it right there. Leadership. You got to have people who know the franchise very, very well, what to pull from, where to pull from, when to pull from, and what the fans might be interested in seeing. And that would translate to a broader audience as well. Kevin Feige does this masterfully, or he did for quite a while. I mean, just brilliantly. You need somebody in there who can kind of do that. And honestly, the only people that have been consistent in doing that, even though they've had their foibles as well, Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni. They know, like, okay, we can pull a little bit of here, we can pull this, we can reference this, we can do this, we can harken back, but we can tell our own story. We can chart our own path and all of that. And that's, I think, at issue here. Kennedy is she just doesn't know this universe. She just doesn't, that's why she had to have a course charted for her by directors and so forth, rather than doing it herself, or even placing people to do that. Got to have a change of leadership, and that also talks about our second scoop that we can go into real fast. And I won't read the whole thing, but Sparrow comes back and says Kathleen Kennedy's leaving, and her departure will be celebrated at Star Wars Celebration. That's kind of the rumor as it exists today. We have been hearing quite a bit from the trades in the industry. I mean, even recently. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. It's going to be right. Here we go, right here. We'll get into that in a moment here. We're going to have this discussion. Just give us a second here. Let's see. This was the lawsuit that was filed by one of, I believe, the producers of The Acolyte, producer Karen McCarthy, for what they say is egregious behavior. But I want to take note here about how Deadline, kind of puts this here. Baller's executive producer Karen McCarthy has taken the Kathleen Kennedy-run Disney division to court over being pink-slipped from the Leslie Headland created series last year after just a few weeks of work. Isn't that interesting how they're framing that?
Oh yeah.
And OG, you made a very great point when it was like they're kind of giving them the Chapek, or giving her, I should say, Kathleen Kennedy, the Chapek treatment. All this bad news, not just this, but just the other day, we heard that all these projects were shelved, right? All this bad news all culminating at once. And we know Iger might have been a reason as to why that happened. Well, now he's in the big seat again. And now he's looking at everybody and going, accountability, accountability, accountability. Isn't this interesting?
Well, and Dre, here's the thing too. In this new environment of accountability, where Disney is looking for any way to save a dime, because I mean, and to be fair, every studio is, we live in a different world right now.
We do.
But you have a studio head in Kathleen Kennedy who burns through money faster than a drunk sailor. She's hiring and firing directors like pretty much every project. There's some sort of director problem. She's getting sued now, or they're getting sued now because of the Acolyte lady. That's going to cost them a pretty penny. So in this new age of accountability and where Disney is trying to save money, where does she fit in? I mean, she's burning through it like crazy, and they're not producing anything. I mean, they have Mando and a handful of Disney Plus shows, but they don't have any movies.
Yep.
The output's like down to it like a dribble,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, go ahead.
They burned through so much talent. I mean, this is the talent that they have issues with, okay? David Benioff, D.B. Weiss, Gareth Edwards, Ryan Johnson, Colin Trevorrow, Phil Lord, Christopher Miller, Josh Trank, Patty Jenkins, Taika Waititi, Kevin Feige, Michael Waldron, Gina Carano, John Boyega, Karen McCarthy. All these people at Lucasfilm is kind of burned, let's say, right? And have made allusions to they're not going to work with Lucasfilm again, or there's no incentive to do that, or whatever. It's like that's an astounding amount of talent. When Disney has to create output for their streaming services and so forth and get people hooked, to burn that much talent and people talk to each other, can't have it. Can't happen. And now a red flag is being hoisted saying, don't do business with Lucasfilm. They're going to burn you with Karen McCarthy's allegations here.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, and her allegations, from what I understand, she not only lost her Acolyte gig, but she lost another gig because of this whole debacle. So not only is the mismanagement of Lucasfilm hurting the studio, but it's also affecting people's personal livelihoods and their careers even. I mean, this is crazy.
And she's saying she did work for the series. She should have had a, let's say 6-figure, 7-figure salary for the work that she did. And they're saying, well, we'll just pay you $5,000. It's like, what? Like, now these are some big problems. Now, if you go work for them, is what they're, this is what this lawsuit is telling the industry. If you go work for Lucasfilm and you do, and Kathleen Kennedy or any number of leadership over there has a conniption fit and throws you out, you ain't even gonna get paid. That's what she's saying right here, and that, I'm telling you, that's a death nail for talent relations at a studio where it takes creative talent to actually make these projects go.
And that's what was Chapek's Achilles heel after the ScarJo thing. No one wanted to work for Disney anymore because of that whole mess. That's why I'm saying they are Bob Chapecking her. She is on the way out. The writing is on the wall. She's done. She's done. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Matt Flores. He says, just want to say, you guys bring it, going where a few other streamers dare. We appreciate it, gentlemen. Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate you, Matt Flores. Thank you so much, brother.
I see this as we were talking about this in the DM conversation that we were having earlier, and I see this as first of all, we put the wrong person in the wrong seat on the bus, right? Kathleen Kennedy is one of the best producers in the history of television. Campia called it when he said there are two types of John Campia. He said there are two types of producers. There are creative producers and there are get it done producers, right? I think what example did he use? Tomorrow I need a 1,000 sharks to go in this lake and go get them, right?
She's that person.
She was great at that.
She's not the creative person. She's always been paired with a creative person, and she is awesome at getting them what they need. The problem is that she doesn't have anybody that's been identified as the person with the seat on the bus, who's the Kevin Feige, who says this is where everything's going. Now we can see what happens when you get involved in too many things, because Kevin Feige's having his own issues over with the MCU.
True.
However, he led Marvel for 20 years before. Well, that's just 20 years, 21 movies, 23 movies, whatever it was, through Endgame that were amazing, like hit after hit after hit. The guy was like he was batting probably 600. The guy was just killing it. And I think that what we're seeing here is that people are starting to realize that there is going to be a power vacuum. They realize that what once was can no longer be. How do we know that? We know it because Chapek's out. Chapek's not doing what people want him to do. Iger comes back in. Iger looks at the scenario, and what has Iger done? Largely what Chapek had been doing. What's the difference? Iger has amazing PR, has amazing navigational skills to get out of tight squeezes that Chapek never had. So Iger's not behaving a lot different than Chapek was, but Iger's realizing I've got to shore up some of my big fleets. Let's just take the people out of the scenario. Look at what Disney's doing and say there's two things you can come to. What is Star Wars contributing to the bottom line? And the answer to that question is right now, not a whole lot, because they're maintaining subscribers of Disney Plus. But let's remember, Disney Plus is losing money for them overall. It's not gaining money for them. So if you're looking at that, you're going, okay, how much are you spending on The Mandalorian? Well, here's the problem, Star Wars. You've either got to come back and bring billion-dollar movies back into our purview so that we can make this revenue, or you're not going to be able to make Disney Plus series anymore. That's a losing proposition because they need content. So you got to get somebody in there who can bring billion-dollar movies back to the forefront. There's no other way to look at it. On a profit and loss statement, Star Wars is not good right now from a profit and loss statement. And so I think that we're essentially looking at the end of an era. We had the George Lucas era. We've had the Kathleen Kennedy era. I am one of those people that I do not hate on Kathleen Kennedy. I think Kathleen Kennedy has given us some amazing Star Wars content. However, she's gotten herself into a place where she's not producing billion-dollar movies. Well, that's a problem because Star Wars can deliver billion-dollar movies. So if you can't deliver that, you got to go. There's no other way around it. And so I think that in this power vacuum, we're seeing a lot of people go, I was told some things that I was going to get to do some things, and now I'm not being able to get to do them. And by the way, if you're Patty Jenkins, you're just sitting there going like, hey, Disney, I'm sitting on $1 billion movie. I'm Patty Jenkins, and I'm doing a Rogue Squadron movie. I'm sitting on $1 billion movie, and we're not doing anything about it. And I'm being told that I don't have a movie anymore. That's insane from a standpoint. So to me, it's not looking good for Star Wars, and they need to quickly transition into somebody who has a vision.
100%, Jay, 100%. And there's actually a joke. I actually saw this on Twitter, and I think it's a joke, but it actually summed up the situation with Lucasfilm and Kennedy kind of perfectly. Is it asked the question, how do you make millions of dollars? Well, you give Kathleen Kennedy billions.
There you go, right? That's pretty good. Boardwalk Times was writing about I believe Bob Iger's was a call today with Morgan Stanley. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Bob Iger said this today on the future of Star Wars films. Quote, "We're going to make sure when we make one, it's the right one. So we're being very careful there." I don't think he's going to allow Kathleen Kennedy to make another Star Wars movie. I think that ship has sailed. I think he is waiting for new leadership new direction, and he has to be, I think personally, convinced that is the direction that they should go. And look, if I'm looking at the whole slate, right, I'm looking at what is popular now, what is working now, what is going now, who are the Star Wars alum who really know this franchise, really know what the fans want, really creating the content that people are most invested in. They're in the building already. Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni. That's it. It was obvious years ago. It's obvious now. That's your consultation team. Now, if you want somebody else to lead, I suppose you can have that happen, right? However, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, they should be in a position in which the universe now can be crafted by their hand. That's the one thing I would mandate. But it's there, and I just think that Iger is looking at it going, this is not going to be this way for long, and to get rid of that power vacuum, somebody should be assigned thusly.
Well, in that Cameron Pasha scoop, if I'm not mistaken, there was some pretty heavy indication that Favreau is the guy, because supposedly he was having talks with Favreau about this kind of like this Ray situation and left Kennedy out of the loop, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
Yeah, yes, actually.
Yeah,
I think
that was
right.
part of it, I think.
That was part of that. So if that is to be believed, and again, this is, rumor until we know for sure, but it seems like they're courting Jon Favreau, or he's got the position kind of at least, not necessarily officially, but in Bob Iger's eyes, he's kind of already there. That makes sense, Trey, that they wouldn't really approve any movies right now if they know that she's on her way out soon and he's coming in soon. Why would you approve new films on her watch when Favreau's coming in 4, 5, 6 months? So, of course, you're going to put on hold and wait for the guy who is the long-term thing.
Yeah. Don't saddle the new guy with something. Go ahead.
I was going to say, especially because, ever since Disney took over, it has made some pretty odd decisions relative to the kind of content they wanted to produce. Now, when I say that, what I mean by that is, if you look at what Favreau and Filoni are doing with Star Wars, we just brought up specific examples where those two guys have been instrumental in bringing in parts of the extended universe, what we call Legends now, have specifically said, let's draw that back from being in Legends into canon. They did it with Thrawn. They did it with the Dark Troopers that we were talking about earlier.
True.
These guys. So I don't know why this happened, but somewhere along the line, somebody, and I don't think this was Kennedy, because it doesn't make sense for it to be Kennedy to me, but somebody along the line said, not Old Republic, High Republic, not let's change some of the things that actually people have loved about Star Wars. I get changing the Heir to the Empire series and making it a sequel trilogy series. I get the purpose behind that. However, though, even the way they did it and the people they chose to do it, it doesn't have the same Favreau, Filoni. We understand this wealth of riches that exists in the EU, that we can pull on some of those things and bring them in. And those are the kind of things that bring you money. How do you know that they bring you money? Because they've already brought you money. Because because Coder was a fantastically selling game. Like it's proven. It's proven. So
it's been tested. It's been proven. It's been, put through the ringer. Implement some of those things and run.
Exactly.
It's
mind-boggling that you would go, no, that won't work. It worked already. What else did you think you needed to do? So I think that Favreau and Filoni are the two people who understand that part of it, because guess what? They were us in those scenarios. They were playing the games. They were reading the Star Wars novels of that day. And so they know what works, because much like Feige, he's a Marvel comic book fan. And he goes, those stories work. And he brings those stories into the fold. So, I think we need somebody. I mean, I think anybody who doesn't think it should be Favreau and Filoni, I'm kind of like, well, who would be better? Like, who name somebody better? Because these guys are the guys that are killing it right now.
It's interesting because you look at this Variety article that talks about all these products getting shelved, Patty Jenkins and Kevin Feige and so forth. It says right here, at the time, The Mandalorian was a scrappy land speeder in the vast Star Wars galaxy, nipping at the heels of Rise of Skywalker, the culminating feature film from director J.J. Abrams that was expected just a month later to obliterate the box office like a cinematic Death Star. Instead, The Mandalorian became a global sensation thanks to an incandescent cuteness of Baby Yoda, blessing Disney Plus into Lightspeed with 26.5 million subscribers in its first 6 weeks. It talks about how Rise of Skywalker, on the other hand, imploded in spectacular fashion, all of that. It's interesting how they bring up Mandalorian so much and its success that it's had, and Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and all that kind of stuff, while talking about the failures of this, this month in the Kathleen Kennedy administration. It's a very interesting thing. Are they setting seeds going, man, these guys work and maybe this gal doesn't? I think so.
Well, look, if you want to go back to when Chapek was really going through it, and there were rumors, I mean, really more than rumors, but we'll call them rumors, that Bob Iger was sort of orchestrating in the background these hit pieces that were going into the trades.
Yep.
Bob Iger is a very connected guy.
Yep.
And look, I'm not saying for sure because we don't know for sure, but it very much rumored that he was kind of the one kind of like behind these Hollywood trade hit pieces against Chapek to nick away at Chapek's credibility. And it's very, very coincidental that we're starting to see the same tactic used against Kathleen Kennedy.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, almost verbatim, the same tactic.
Yeah. Almost verbatim. It's very. This is a story to watch, folks. I think this is culminating to its finale conclusion sometime soon here, and Indiana Jones might end up being the swan song. We'll see.
Yeah, and there is one difference between the two of them, and that is that Kathleen Kennedy had a resume prior to her current role that Chapek just did not have.
That's true.
And it was a popular resume. So I do think the big difference we're going to see in the narrative is that, and we've seen this from people reporting on rumors about Celebration this year, is that it's going to be the swan song celebrating Kathleen Kennedy. And I think that is appropriate. And I think that it's different than Chapek. But what it does is, I mean, look, Iger is a master of manipulating things into being the way he wants us to see them. And I think that basically what he's doing here, to your point, OG, is he's manipulating things to say, for any of those out there who think that Star Wars is in a good place, I just want to prove to you that it's not. Mm-hmm. We're going to go ahead and celebrate this person, and then we're going to move on. And I think that is really what's pretty much needed in Star Wars right now. So
it is. And really talent relations with Lucasfilm. That's not, that's a big part of it too.
Yep.
And they paid a lot of money for this. They paid a lot of money for something that, look, they're in a tough place financially. They paid a lot of money for this asset. This asset has to produce something for them. That's just what it comes down to. Those three things are what it's going to come down to, and they're not producing the way that they should. I mean, when did Rise of Skywalker come out? That was in 2019?
2019.
So we're coming up on, by the time they actually were to film a movie and release it, it's going to be 5+ years since we've seen a Star Wars film in theaters, when the question is, why? You know what I mean? Like, it's very odd, very odd.
I think there's a slot in 2025 for a Star Wars film. Will it make it? I don't know. No. That's a very odd thing, though. I mean, it's can you imagine? She's only been in the spot for almost 10 years, and I mean, where are we at? Are we in a better position than when we started? I don't know. New directions needed for sure, but that brings us to, I think, our last topic of the day. Navarro.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that back up.
1. Yeah. Galaxy's Edge and the future of Star Wars in the parks, which I think is very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is fascinating. Jon Favreau wants the Mandalorian Razor Crest ride at Disney parks. Go ahead, Dre. Read that. I have bad eyes.
Yeah, it's okay. Dank Farrick. It seems that if Jon Favreau, the creator of Mandalorian, had his way, Din Djarin's ship would make a crash landing in a Disney park. In a recent interview with IMDb, Favreau shared that the Razor Crest could be the perfect attraction for bringing the Mandalorian to Disney guests. And it goes through here. It says he's given it a great deal of thought. Favreau said that this attraction would, quote, probably be the Razor Crest. The creator expanded on his plans for using Mando's vessel, explaining that he sees an opportunity for using the show's special effects for an experience that blends behind-the-scenes feel with an energetic ride. Quote, I know when I was younger, I loved when they pull the curtain back on the effects in the movies, explained Jon Favreau. Quote, it really made me probably want to do the things that I'm doing now, so I think that there should be an educational component, but not educational like a museum, reading a plaque or something like that. Educational like sitting here, feel this, and here's how we did it. He went on to say that he would probably want to do something, quote, immersive, developing advanced haptics as part of the attraction. He said that he would even like to use the assets that they use in The Volume. The Volume is a cutting-edge filmmaking technology developed by ILM that replaces traditional green screens with a more authentic immersive backdrop. The Volume has been utilized in the productions of The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Ant-Man Quantumania, interestingly enough. It uses a massive curved LED screen. You can read that, but to get back to the big thing here, I think Katie Sackhoff said that she wanted Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout to be made into a Star Wars attraction because that's like her favorite or whatever. Yeah, I don't think so, but that's not going to happen. But it's interesting though. I mean, the Razor Crest being part of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, there is this parcel of land right here. OG, if you can share my screen. Nobody talks about this when it comes to the Avatar rumors or anything like that, right? But there's a little parcel of land right here. You can see the Millennium Falcon in the shot, right? Between the Millennium Falcon and Toontown, there's about 2.5 acres or so right there, and which was dedicated early on to be the third attraction for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. I think the smart play would be to kind of lean into the Mandoverse and deliver something in this space that people are really excited about right now.
And that would be really smart because that you can kill the timeline, and then you can start to build a variety of attractions in this land based on different eras. So you'll have, hey, sequel trilogy lovers can check out Rise of the Resistance. Hey, if you're into the Mandoverse, you're into the Filoni stuff. Hey, you got this Razor Crest attraction, right? And maybe down the road we'll get an OT attraction, right? I think it's a smart move to sort of break away this timeline, start putting stuff in there from various eras. Jay, you recently went to Avengers Campus for the first time and absolutely loved it because it had fun. It didn't take itself overly serious, right? And it allows itself to bring in characters. You can have the the Sam Wilson Captain America, and 10 minutes later you're seeing the Chris Evans version of the character. It makes no sense, but it doesn't matter. Fans don't care. They're just having a blast. I hope they do the same with Galaxy's Edge. Really mix these eras in there and give us a variety of experiences.
It'd be really cool if you do a Razor Crest simulator and then you're on a mission and you do it, or whatever that happens to be, right? And then maybe on Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, right next door, you get to play the other side of that mission, and you see the Razor Crest, do the things that you were just a part of on that ship. So that would be kind of some commingling, some co-integration right there. You could do this up extremely well. Jay, what do you think?
So in my opinion, I mean, the ideal situation is going to cost too much, I think, for them to want to do. So this is blue sky territory that I'm about to go into. This is not practical in any way, shape, or form. But I think that what would have worked better than what is working now is, yes, we to use your earlier word, Dre, we bifurcate the timeline into, there's a place where there's something around the original trilogy era, there's something around the sequel trilogy era, and then there's something around even the prequel trilogy era. And so I think that it unfortunately did not work as well to have this new planet called Batuu. It's very cool, but it's not Tatooine, it's not Hoth, it's not a known planet that we've seen before. So in my like favorite scenario, Smuggler's Run gets an update so that it's original trilogy, and instead of the animatronic coming in and seeing what's the guy's name?
Hondo.
Yes, instead of seeing Hondo Ohnaka, you see you see Chewbacca, and Chewbacca's up there, and he's doing like, hey, we gotta do something that relates to the original trilogy, and you get in the same vehicle. It's the same vehicle, and you get in and see different screens, different mission. I think you keep Rise of the Resistance the way it is. It's great, but I do think that you could pull in. I would love to see them update something to be a little bit more Hoth-like, maybe something that's a little bit more Tatooine-like. We're missing a pod racer ride somewhere. By the way, I do think that we could do two separate things here too. I think that, let's just say you're going to do the minimalist approach and you're not going to hardly do anything. I think if you're going to hardly do anything, you take the Florida version, because of the issues they're having with Galactic Star Cruiser, and you slightly retheme Galactic Star Cruiser, and then you make Batuu Navarro, and you just say, look, we're going to have some Mandalorian type experiences, some shows over at the Galactic Star Cruiser, and we're just going to give Batuu a paint job. And so that gives you the ability to sell two different lands as well, right? So
that's interesting.
Do you want to go to the one land? Do you want to go to the other land? But I don't know what they're going to do. I do think that Navarro looked awfully like Batuu, and it makes me suspicious that they're going to do something with that. Other than that, I do think that they've got some. It's a bummer to be talking about a land that just came out and saying that we already are like, we need to do something different with it. But when I went to Disneyland recently, the only thing I was excited to do inside of Galaxy's Edge was Rise of the Resistance. That was it. I mean, that kind of speaks for itself, right? Like, didn't really care to go on Smuggler's Run. It was not a long line.
It's 14 acres. That should be an immersive experience. It shouldn't just be a tunnel by which you access Rise of Resistance and Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. It has to be more than that. And I did hear, oh my gosh, late 2019, early 2020, I heard of an idea about getting in Grief Cargo, getting in Cara Dune as the marshal, having Din Djarin there, having him get in fight with classic stormtroopers, all that kind of stuff, walking around the land and pretty much making it Navarro without being it Navarro. Maybe it's like right next to Navarro and expand, and here you go, that kind of thing. And the pandemic happened, and then all that went away. I saw the art, I saw the stuff. It was like, ooh, that's interesting, and nothing actually materialized. I think they're kind of circling back on that again, especially with the performance of Mandalorian. I think it's going to be a real winner for Disney Plus, and it's like, I think this is where we go, guys. I mean, this is it.
We get that really dope IG-11 statue in the land,
It's not bad. I like that.
That'd be cool. Yeah. There's a lot of potential. We have Michael Ebba. Yes, please kill the timeline. Fans just want to be in Star Wars with their favorite characters and amazing attractions. That's really immersive.
As part of Princess Night, you had a 3+ hour line for Princess Leia and R2-D2. 3+ hours. That's more than the event was allotted for, right? You're basically waiting the whole time in line. And by the way, it's in Tomorrowland, not in Galaxy's Edge.
What?
Yes, and this is what's so stupid about the whole thing, because it's Lucasfilm, I guarantee it, because Marvel's not having this problem with Avengers Campus. I mean, they're rigid on the timeline. I'm almost certain it's the studio making all these demands, right? It's not Imagineering, because they don't do it with Marvel for some reason, but it's like you have a 14-acre land dedicated to Star Wars, and you can't use any of the Star Wars except for this tiny little sliver of the franchise. You have this vast galaxy of so many eras and things you can throw into this land, and you're forced to put this stuff in Tomorrowland. Like, why did you build this 14-acre land then? It makes no sense. They got to get rid of that timeline.
They have to. And people want to see the classic characters. They want to see classic Leia. Okay, throw her in there. Yes. Give people what they want. Like, what? How is it so hard to do this? Hey, Iger just said we're going to be listening to the audience. Okay, listen to me. I'm the audience. Pay full price multiple times to walk in there. Get freaking Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Darth Vader, and everybody wants to see in there. What are you doing? Look at the reaction that Din Djarin had. Just Din Djarin. When he walked in there with Baby Yoda. Did you see the mass of people in Florida when he made his debut? Get them in there. Let's stop this whole, I mean, look, we're never going to get the droids. We're never going to get the interactive stuff that we were supposed to. Look, fine. The easiest way to turn this around on a dime with limited capital investment, get the characters in there. What are you doing? Like, this is ridiculous.
And Jay, I think you said it. This is going to tie it all in a nice little bow with Mando. You said it. That the Mandalorian, what's her name with the hammer? I'm blanking.
The armor.
The armor. She's more concerned about the rules than the people.
Yes.
And that's exactly what's going on here with Batu. They're more concerned about the rules than the people. They're more concerned about maintaining the timeline than they are about giving us what we want. Just give us what we want. Get, like you said, the Princess Leia, the Han, all that. Just do it. It's simple. It's inexpensive. I don't understand.
Bruce Vaughn, Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, get these fundamentalist Lucasfilm and WDI guys out of there. Get them out and be like, hey, we're going in a different direction. We tried your way. It didn't work. We have, by the way, failing attendance at Galactic Star Cruiser right here. They're having to cut voyages down to half, basically, because that's in shambles right now. It didn't work. It didn't work, and that's okay. That's fine. These are huge investments. Sometimes some things don't work. But Galaxy's Edge, there are things that you can integrate that won't cost that much money that will turn around on a dime, right? That's a very easy thing right there. Maybe you would add an attraction that incorporates more of Star Wars as a whole, right? Because people say the best Star Wars ride that they have is Star Tours because it integrates the Star Wars that I know and love. Okay, well, you got to think about that, and you got to, maybe incorporate that in that land. But with Star Wars, with the Galactic Star Cruiser, that's a tricky thing. Not a lot of easy answers there, for sure. But I think what happened with Galactic Star Cruiser is endemic of the problem at Lucasfilm and WDI related to Star Wars product in the park right now. It's just not very fun, not very enticing to, I think, the widest gamut possible, right? Like Jedi Training Academy, Star Wars weekends. People love those things. Mm-hmm. Let's bring them back in here and realize why those things were successful.
Well, and let me just say this too. We know what would be successful because it's been successful for 40 years. Yeah. The original trilogy. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like they tripled down, they quadrupled down on new Star Wars as opposed to saying what's worked this whole time, guys. What's worked? We could just retheme the Galactic Star Cruiser. Okay, so let's just say this. Retheme the Galactic Star Cruiser now. Bring in some of the characters from the original trilogy, make it an original trilogy story. Mm-hmm. Are we having the same problem? No, the thing's booked. It's instantly booked. Right. You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean, I think that they've got to do something. I think that they got to stop doing the cruise mentality on that thing too, because I just think that was probably a failed idea. But the reality is that they can do stuff with what they've got. They're just not doing it, to both your points.
100%.
Tools are there.
Yep.
Tools are there, and now people say, why do people say Disney Star Wars? Isn't that a problem? Isn't that an issue? Shouldn't it just be Star Wars? You got to really, it's kind of like, it's almost like Tiana, right? With Splash Mountain and all that kind of stuff that's going on, right? Where it's just gone so far off, off from Princess and the Frog. It's just its own thing now, and it's like, it's getting people really worried, and people are like unsure about this. Well, Dusty made a great point about that. It's like, you got to watch the movie again. Watch the movie again and incorporate those things that we love about Princess and the Frog in that attraction. And then people will feel all right. They'll feel okay about it. And I do agree with that. Star Wars is kind of the same way. Rewatch the original stuff again. Tap into what makes these stories, and I would even include the prequels in that. Oh, yeah. What makes these stories live on in the way that they have for over 40 plus years, right? To your point, Jay. And look, Mandalorian, they use prequel iconography and stuff all the time. People are like, yeah, that's awesome. There's a way to make this work. It's just, I don't think the people right there at the decision making area of the company regarding Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. I just, you got a bad mix there. It's a what is it? Unfavorable mix. You gotta switch them out.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. All right. Well, guys.
Gentlemen, that has been really fun. That was all good. We got 2 episodes of The Mandalorian in. We got a bunch of Star Wars rumors that we covered.
Yes.
2.5-hour show for the people. Hopefully people are enjoying it.
Hopefully.
We will be back next Thursday for episode 3. If there's any additional rumors, I'm sure we'll talk about those as well. Probably won't be a 2.5-hour show, but we'll probably be a little shorter. And we've got one of my good friends, Megan Salinas, that will be joining us. She's a Story Geeks longtime guest of the Story Geeks, so she'll be really fun to have on the show too. Super fun person, and looking forward to talking about that. She's also a big fan of The Mandalorian, so it should be really good. OG, tell the people where they can find you and what else you got going on. You guys are always doing shows. I come in and I do like a show every once in a while. You guys are like every night of the week. What kind of stuff do you guys got coming up?
We got all kinds of stuff coming up. We are we're really on this whole Avatar story. I mean, everyone's talking about it on social media. What's it going to be? What's it not going to be? So we're going to continue to follow that. We got some really great guests coming up in the upcoming week or 2 weeks or so. It can be a lot of fun. So stay tuned, subscribe, hit the notification bell. We have a lot of great content here on YouTube, and you can also find me on Twitter at Orange Grove 55. And Jay, I just want to say thank you so much for being a gracious and amazing host. It was a lot of fun talking Star Wars. May the force be with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. By the way, if you're still in the chat, hit the like button for us. It's always good to hit the like button. Get this content in front of more people, and they can all join us for next week's show, which is awesome. Dre, where can the people find you? Dre does an amazing amount of research. He breaks down problems extremely well. Where can people find all of this analysis, Dre?
Best place to find me is probably going to be at VashSky on Twitter. It's right down there. You just go ahead and type that in. Should pop up for, as Christine Waysense McCarthy would say, for all the, let's see.
Robust.
Discussion right there. Sorry. I had to think about that for a second. Okay. I just make sure everything was right. And if you guys want to see me, it's going to be on the channel you watch right now at Orange Grove 55, where we have some amazing shows in the works, but also as a regular feature. So yes, I will concur with OG. We have been talking about Avatar a little bit. That's the big story. I think we might talk about it again tomorrow, just to kind of, set fact from fiction. That's an interesting thing. Yeah, exactly. I know. Hey, you know what? Iger's comments today. There's a lot to chew on there. The D23 article, people are running with it and going in a few places. I think it's appropriate that we discuss that and more. So if you want to go ahead and do that, please subscribe, like the video that you're watching right now, turn on those the notification bell icon right there so that you get notified when we actually upload content. Because there's gonna be a couple of things I can guarantee you on that. But if you guys want to see me, OG55, but my show Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove.
Yes. Epic.
We got to play the casual drop because casual's in the chat.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Yeah, we got to do the casual drop, and it's actually Star Wars related, so that's a double whammy.
There you go.
Hold on. Here we go. This goes out to casual.
I don't know. Fly casual.
I love it. Yeah. Thanks to everybody for joining us in the chat. It's been a real pleasure. You can keep watching more Story Geek shows right here on the OG55 channel. So make sure you're subscribed. Like I said, we're going to be riding it out with The Mandalorian every single week. We're going to be coming to you with discussion on the latest episode. Plus, we had some really fun shows talking about Up and Encanto. So you can go back in the channel and look those up as well. I've been giving these guys a little bit of grief on Twitter about the Avatar stuff, and we've been going back and forth about what it could be. And these guys are well informed, so you should definitely pay attention to what they have to say. Every time I kind of like poke at Dre a little bit. He sends me a map and shows me like, I don't think it's gonna happen there, buddy.
Look, I don't. Hey, that's just how I'm wired, man. Somebody says something, I say maybe or this, and that's what I do.
I love it. I love it.
Sorry.
It's the best. No. I appreciate it. I love it. So yeah, definitely. And if you want to check out some of my additional content, if you're into storytelling, or if you want to be a part of telling stories in some way, shape, or form, the How Stories Work with Jay Sherer channel is another channel that I'm a part of, where I get a little bit deeper into, screenplay conversations, literature conversations, book conversations, all that kind of good stuff. So again, gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll be back here next week. These guys will be here all week long. They're never going to leave you without content. And so definitely hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we will see you guys in a future show. Bye.